Okay, I think we're recording. Oh, wait, I gotta do this. Okay, I just eliminated the reverb, I hope. So, hello and welcome to episode 91 of Question and Answer. I am your host, Panyo Basa, and I'm all set for some difficult questions today because some people have asked some difficult questions. And so I've got the cup of hot coffee right here. I got the emergency backup can of lukewarm energy drink. I got the dirty socks. Let's see, I got the chopstick. I got the bag of charcoal, and we're ready to go. So, first question. I know I'm forgetting to say something that's really important that I should be saying right now, but I'm not saying it because I don't remember to say it. So the first question is from Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana. And his question is, why do you say enlightenment might not mean anything in a samsaric context when the suttas clearly say it is the absence of greed, hate, and delusion? Maybe you don't agree with that. Well, the suttas say all kinds of things. So, from the orthodox Theravadan point of view, there's just this clear demarcation between enlightened and unenlightened. Once a person's enlightened, they are just unequivocally, just empirically, qualitatively enlightened. And it says here that enlightenment is the absence of greed, hate, and delusion. Although, if you read the suttas, you will see that even an enlightened being will seem to appear to have greed, hate, and delusion. There is still the outward semblance of greed, hate, and delusion, and the dogs are snarting and snarfing and doing all kinds of things. You guys calm down. Oh, it's just one. There's just one dog lying on her back, rolling around, snarfing. Stop it. Here, say hi to the. Say hi. She says hi. Here, look at the camera. Look at the camera. There. Okay. Now go do something quiet. So, anyways. The Buddha himself, he'll be referring to people as you and that person and this other person, which is, that would be delusional from the Orthodox point of view, if one was taking that seriously. So there's still like the outward semblance of greed, hate, and delusion. The Buddha still had preferences, at least from an outward observer's observations of him. He still preferred quiet to noise, for example. So outwardly, there is still the semblance of greed, hate, and delusion. So still at the samsaric level, one could argue that there still is a certain amount of greed, hate, and delusion, even in a fully enlightened being, even in a Sammasambuddha. Because enlightenment is essentially going off the scale. The enlightened part of your mind is not samsaric. So the text can say that there's just this straightforward demarcation between enlightened and unenlightened, but I just don't see that. And if you read the text, there's Buddhas in the past have given speeches or Dhamma talks, I guess it'd be called, causing literally billions of people to become fully enlightened arahants. If you read the commentary to the Buddha Vamsa, for example, you find all kinds of stories like that. So, just because the text says something is, it's not exactly proof. We're going to get to this later. What is like a genuine criterion for truth? And scriptural authority is not that. But since Buddhism is, in a way, it's advertised as, the way to become enlightened, then obviously you have to have, clear examples in the text of people who became enlightened, starting with the Buddha himself. But it all depends on how you look at it. So, an unenlightened person, he looks at an enlightened being and all he's seeing is another unenlightened being. Whereas an enlightened being could look around, maybe, and see that everyone else is enlightened too. So this is kind of a maybe not the best question to start off on, because generally I have to work up a little bit of momentum. You know, I don't have full momentum going until like 3 or 4 questions deep into this thing. And here I am getting hit with this question, but I do try to answer questions more or less in chronological order. So let's see. I'll just read this question one more time. Why do you say enlightenment might not mean anything in a samsaric context? Yeah, and also, you know, like for example, Paul Lowe, who has a reputation for being fully enlightened, he just says, you know, there is no state of enlightenment. You know, this is it. He's got a chapter in one of his books that's called "This Is It." You know, this is, you know, there is no state of enlightenment other than just being completely present in the present moment, kind of a deal. But yeah, I mean, if you do look at the text, you see that enlightened beings still have a semblance of greed, hate, and delusion. Like Neem Karoli Baba up there, in my opinion, he could be a fully enlightened being, but still, I mean, he laughed, he cried, he roared, he bellowed, he hit people, he did all kinds of things, which from like an Orthodox Theravadan's point of view would be, no, that just disqualifies him immediately. Or even Ramana Maharshi, who was much more saintly of a person with a reputation for being a fully enlightened being, but even so, he worshipped a hill. Like almost the only thing he actually wrote was devotional hymns to this hill called Arunachala, which would seem kind of delusional to people who were not devotees of Shiva, who considered Arunachala to be sacred to the god Shiva. So, yeah, I do think that enlightenment, it's not a samsaric phenomenon. That it's like a transcendence of samsara, and that's one reason why you're enlightened, because you're no longer stuck in samsara. But I don't know. Maybe you should ask this question again, like a few days after a Q&A, so that it won't be the first question. So I won't be like getting my stride going on that question. So I'm just going to move on to Siovak and Sipat Zirina's next question. I'm sorry, I probably didn't do justice to that first question, because it is kind of an important one would think. But as I say, I got human limitations here. And I got to build up my reputation. Or reputation? Momentum. I meant to say momentum. And people have noticed that I've been clearing my throat a lot lately, which happens in phases. It used to happen to me as a monk sometimes too. And drinking this coffee with milk in it doesn't really help that, because it increases the amount of mucousy lining in my throat that causes me to want to clear my throat more. So I'm just moving on to Siovak and Sipat Zirina's second question here. If you had to choose to be a monk in one of the Buddhist schools in ancient times, which one would you choose? Well, that's hard to say, because I really have only a superficial understanding of the different schools of Buddhism that existed, say, 200 years after the Buddha's time. You know, before Mahayana, but when there were like the 30 schools, there's this, you know, there were lots of schools in India. I would guess maybe Sautrantika, just because they didn't have an Abhidhamma. But if I were a man living in, you know, ancient northern India, like 200 years after the time of the Buddha, in all likelihood, just being realistic, I would have joined the school of Buddhism that just was predominant in my area, because it seems to have been largely a regional thing. You know, it was largely isolation that caused the evolution of these different sects of Buddhism. You know, it's like communications didn't move any faster than a monk could walk in those days. And so there was a certain amount of isolation, and it was just sort of like genetic drift, you know, the way organic evolution is said to work, at least in some cases where you have an isolated population. They'll just be drifting in a different direction from the main population, because, you know, there's like this canyon in between them or some such. So, yeah, I mean, ideally, you'd be able to go and check out different schools. And I mean, that's what I did before I became a monk. I checked out a few different places in the one that resonated the best with my temperament or my intuition or whatever was the one that that I decided to go with. And it just seemed like it came closer to what the Buddha originally taught. So it's hard to say exactly what school I would choose. If I could choose between all of the Shravakayana schools that existed before the advent of Mahayana. But maybe Sautrantika. I'm not sure that I would choose Theravada if all the other ones existed. Although I have read like A.K. Warder's History of Indian Buddhism. He did say that Theravada and also Sautrantika were two of the most conservative schools, the ones that had the least amount of doctrinal innovation. So let's just say Sautrantika, just because they didn't have an Abhidhamma for me to reject. So I'll just move on to the next question here, which is, what is the most profound thing you have ever heard or read? And that's another tough question, and it's hard to say because at different times, different things are going to strike you. You're just kind of ripe to hear a certain thing, and then you hear it, and then boom, that seems like a very profound thing. And then you can come back and read the same thing 10 years later, and it seems kind of commonplace because, you've already absorbed it and integrated it, and it's no longer a mind blower anymore. And now it's something else that's mind blowing. So there have been a lot of things I've read that really I consider to be mind blowing, but I can't really pick out one thing that would be more profound than anything else. Like in the Atthakavagga, there's lots of things that are mind blowing. And just by random chance, I happen to have a little copy of it right here. Like, for example, let's see. For like the Magandiya Sutta, the third verse of the Magandiya Sutta is profound. And it is, "There is nothing of which I say, I declare this, Magandiya," said the Blessed One, "seized, having discriminated from among the philosophies, but looking among the views, not taking hold of anything, examining, I saw inner peace." And that is, it just kind of kicks most Buddhist dogma in the head. It's like the Buddha is here saying that he does not say of anything, "I declare this." So, he's not insisting upon any point of view. Or then just a couple verses later, there's this gem. "Not by what is viewed, not by what is heard, not by inner knowledge, Magandiya," said the Blessed One, "nor by morality and observances is purity said to be. By absence of what is viewed, by absence of what is heard, by non-knowledge, by amorality, by non-observance, also not by that. So having let go of these, not taking hold of anything, a peaceful one, not being dependent, would not have longings for existence." So that's kind of a mind blower too. But I've come across mind blower or just profound things so many times. I think there'd be like a tie for first place involving, maybe 20 different things. The Tibetan Book of the Great Liberation, also known as the Yoga of Knowing the Mind in its Nakedness, attributed to Padmasambhava, is a profound text. The Diamond Cutter Sutra is a profound text. The Heart Sutra is a profound text. The Atthakavagga of the Sutta Nipata is a profound text. Most Theravada suttas, however, tend to be pretty dry. So, you've got to get over the dry style to really get some of the profundity. And usually an entire sutta will not be profound. There'll just be a few statements that can really stand out in a Pali text, like the Alagadupama Sutta is, in a way, it's sort of like a combination of different things that the Buddha said, and some are more profound than others, so forth. Some Zen koans are profound. Like one of my favorite ones is Tozan's 60 Blows, about this monk, I think it was Tozan, who came to stay at this monastery, and the abbot's just kind of checking him out, and he's just asking him, where are you from? And then Tozan just gives like the standard objective answer of, naming some monastery. And then the abbot asks him, where did you spend the rains retreat? And Tozan just gives this standard, basic answer. And then the abbot says, I spare you 60 blows. And then he sends him away. And Tozan, apparently, I assume that Tozan was the visitor and not the abbot, if I remember correctly. He's just sort of tossing and turning all night, wondering why he was spared 60 blows the day before. So the next day he goes to the master and says, yesterday you said you spared me 60 blows. Where was I at fault? And the abbot just explodes and just starts saying, he just starts yelling at him, oh, you are good for nothing. You just wander around from one place to another. And at that moment, the visiting monk became enlightened. And just contemplating that is, for some reason, intuitively, that koan really strikes a chord with me. But I got lots of other questions to answer here. So I think I might as well answer some more questions instead of continuing to ramble about that other one. Yeah, it's taken me a while to get some momentum going, I think. Drink some more coffee and coat my throat. So the next question is from Pranav. And Pranav says, how did Venerable Maha Kassapa attain parinibbana? In some other school of Buddhism, it is said that he went to Mount Kukatapada and made a firm determination to keep his body intact until the coming of Mattaya Buddha to hand over the rag robes that the Gautama Buddha gave him on their first meeting. Well, for starters, I would say that this story here is probably apocrypha. For example, keeping his body intact until the coming of Mattaya Buddha, and I'm skeptical of the idea that in the Buddha's time there was already this belief in other Buddhas that their names are already determined, and there's this long line of Sammasam Buddhas in the past, and our eon happens to have, I think was it 5 or 7? 7, I think. And I mean, that is just sort of a glorification. It's like devotionalistic Buddha glorification. You're coming up with this elaborate myth that is setting Buddhas way above ordinary enlightened beings, which originally they probably were not. Also, he's trying to keep his body intact until the coming of Mattaya Buddha to hand over the rag robes that Gautama Buddha gave him on their first meeting. It's hardly likely that Maha Kassapa would still have the first set of robes that he had when he became a monk. In fact, in the text, it says that Maha Kassapa, who was very ascetic, he was the great disciple of the Buddha who was outstanding with regard to keeping the dhutangas, or the optional ascetic practices. And he would wear a robe and just keep patching it and patching it and patching it until it got too heavy for him to keep wearing. And probably get too heavy to dry out after he washed it when it's like 8 layers of cloth thick. So he'd have to get another robe. So it's very unlikely. I mean, cloth just rots anyway in the tropics and subtropics, going through one rainy season after another. It would take some kind of psychic powers just to keep his robes from just rotting off of him. So, yeah, I would consider that story in and of itself to be a myth without much grounding in actual objectivity. But the fact is, nobody knows exactly how Maha Kassapa died, or at least there's no well-established tradition. It might be in some kind of commentarial literature, but the Pali texts themselves do not say what happened after Maha Kassapa died. And at least I don't remember it. And in Burma, there is a national park called Alaundo Kassapa National Park. And the belief is that Maha Kassapa, for whatever reason, wandered all the way up into northwestern Burma to die. And I mean, it would have been hunter-gatherers living there probably. There certainly wouldn't be Buddhists there. And why he went to this cave, there's a cave in the center of the park. And Alando Kassapa National Park, the Alando Kassapa literally means in Burmese, the noble corpse of Kassapa, because they believe that there's a cave in the center of the park and it's kind of magically sealed most of the time. But sometimes it starts to open a little bit, and there's all these treasures and so forth inside this cave, and you can go insane if you look in when it's like open a little bit. And Maha Kassapa's body is inside of that cave, and I looked at it, and it looks like there's this opening maybe this big, and it's not really an opening. It's like you got this layer of rock on the lining of the cave, and then there's like this indentation, and there's just like this flat, like a door, which is probably like another geological stratum that, you know, the rock fell away from the outer geological stratum in that area, leaving another geological stratum. But some people think that that inner geological stratum that looks like a door to this more or less circular indentation in the rock opens sometimes. And I've never seen it open, and I'm kind of skeptical that it does open. And I'm very skeptical that Maha Kassapa would wander all the way up into the wilderness of northwestern Burma, which is still to this day pretty much wilderness, in order to die. But I stayed in a cave about 20 miles north of there, and it was like common knowledge among some superstitious Buddhists in that area that Maha Kassapa did stay in that same cave that I was staying in, at least for one night when he was walking to die in the other cave. But yeah, I don't know. Even the commentarial tradition, if it does have a tradition of what happened with Maha Kassapa, you know, how he died or where he died or anything like that, there's a good chance it would just be legends and myths. So, I mean, fortunately for us, it doesn't really matter how he died, because there's no way for us to know for sure anyway. So I guess I'll just move on to Pranav's second question, which is, I mean, Pranav's questions might have been better for me to start off the Q&A instead of just diving right into these profound metaphysical ones. But Pranav's second question is, sila-samadhi-pañña or dana-sila-bhavana, which is better for a layman? And dana-sila-bhavana is pretty much designed for lay people. You know, there's two different trinities of practice, so to speak. The usual one that you read about is sila-samadhi-pañña, which is morality, concentration, wisdom. You know, you purify your morals, which allows you to purify your concentration, which allows you to purify your wisdom. And that's mainly for monks, because Theravada Buddhism started off being mainly for monks. And so most of the teachings in Theravada Buddhism are intended for monks. But later on, I think this other trilogy or what is it, trinity of like regarding practice came up that was more designed for lay people, which is dana-sila-bhavana. So dana means generosity. You start off being generous, especially generous to monks. And then you got sila, which is morality. And in Buddhism, generosity, like a positive virtue of you actually doing something, is different from sila, which is refraining from doing wrong. So you can have perfect sila while just sitting there doing nothing. Whereas other things like generosity require effort and generally do not fit under the category of sila. And then finally, after dana or generosity and sila or morality, you've got bhavana, which is cultivation or development, which is mental development, which means primarily meditation. You know, like the Bhavana Society is like the meditation society. But it can also mean cultivating your mind in other ways, like contemplating scriptures and so forth, which might be considered a kind of meditation anyway. So, yeah, dana-sila-bhavana is the formula designed specifically for lay people, and sila-samadhi-pañña is the formula designed particularly for monks. And there are differences, similar differences, like you've got one set or one formula for monks and one formula for lay people, or one interpretation for monks and one interpretation for lay people. For example, in Burma, it's commonly believed that when a layperson takes the three refuges in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha is just monks and nuns. And the nuns, according to the Burmese, are extinct now. So it's the monks. You're taking refuge in the Sangha of monks. Whereas for a monk, when he takes the three refuges of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, the Sangha is the Arya Sangha, which ironically includes lay people, because it's anybody who's ever become an Arya. So that wouldn't even necessarily be Buddhists, because there are non-Buddhists who have become Aryas, like Bahia became enlightened without ever converting to Buddhism or becoming a monk. But, I mean, it all amounts to the same thing. So, I mean, whichever works best for you is fine. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Athena's Sigil. And Athena's Sigil says, so now that you're a layman again, will you be reborn in samsara as you rejected being a bhikkhu and enlightenment? Well, I didn't necessarily reject enlightenment. You know, it's like, it wasn't when I dropped out of the monkhood, I'm just like, screw enlightenment. I'm not doing that. So, will I be reborn in samsara? Well, that's yet to be determined. We'll just have to wait and see, won't we? But although I did essentially reject being a bhikkhu, I did not reject wisdom or enlightenment or any such thing. I just got as far as I could with being a bhikkhu. And after several years of not making any real progress, any discernible progress, I decided it's time to try something else. So, will I be reborn in samsara? According to Orthodox Theravada, it's extremely likely. But again, who knows? We'll just have to wait and see. And so I'll just move on to Athena Sigil's next question, which is, do you have any favorite biographies of famous or well-known Theravada monks? And I've only read one biography of a Theravada monk that I can think of, and that's the famous biography of Ajahn Mun, which was written by Ajahn Mahabua. And it's surreal. It's very surreal. It will stretch the capacity of belief for just about any Westerner who reads it, because there's all sorts of things in there that are very far out and just flatly contradictory to Theravadan orthodoxy. Like Ajahn Mun was having like long dead Buddhas and with retinues of hundreds of long dead arahants coming to visit him in his cave, for example. And I mean, it's not supposed to work that way. It's like once you're a Buddha and you have died, then there's no returning to samsara. And even if you're just an ordinary arahant, there's no returning to samsara. But the Thais, they're not as orthodox as the Burmese are, because they are less scholarly in their studying of Theravadan orthodox dogma, which has its good points and its bad points. But I won't get into that, because I'm just moving on to the next question, which is from Tig. And Tig, in addition to being kind of a wise guy, he's also kind of a foodie, it seems like. And so he asked the strange question, what is your favorite soup? And I'm not sure that I even have a favorite soup. Like oyster stew, I kind of like. Haven't had it in a long time. My father used to make a really good oyster stew, but it's kind of arguable whether stew and soup are the same. Same goes for like clam chowder. I assume clam chowder, like a New England style, would qualify as soup. So maybe something along those lines. But all in all, I don't have a favorite soup. I've never tried to figure out what my favorite soup is. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Master Poe. And Master Poe says, Grasshopper, there are 3 facts to a man. 1, is there is what others think of you. 2 is there is what you think of yourself. And 3, there is what you truly are. Of these 3, which one is the most true? I mean, obviously, what's the point of asking this question? It should be plainly obvious that the third one, what you truly are, is the most true. I mean, how could anything be more true than what something truly is? I mean, it's pretty much of a self-answering question. So, yeah, what others think of you and what you think of yourself are delusional, essentially. And then what you truly are is, that's it. That's the truth right there. So, I think that was an easy one to answer. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Lieberlam. And Lieberlam says, Calvinist Christians have a set of terms, and I'm curious how you would evaluate these differently as far as being knowable realities. They go as follows. The 5 solas are 5 Latin phrases that emerged during the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. They are sola scriptura, or scripture alone, the belief that the Bible is the sole authority for Christian faith and practice. The second one is sola fide, or faith alone, the belief that salvation is attained through faith in Jesus Christ alone, not by good works or human effort. The third one is sola gratia, or grace alone, the belief that salvation is a gift from God received by His grace alone, not earned by human merit. Then becomes solus Christus, Christ alone, the belief that Jesus Christ is the only mediator between God and humanity, and salvation is found only in Him. And then finally, you've got soli Deo Gloria, or glory to God alone. This belief that all glory and honor belongs to God alone, and everything is ultimately for His glory. So my question is, how would you rank these as far as knowability goes? And this is kind of similar to a lot of philosophical debate going on in ancient India. Like, what is a true criterion for knowledge? And of course, anyone in a Vedic tradition, a Hindu or a proto-Hindu, anyone who accepts the Vedas as authoritative, would have to put scripture, as a reliable criterion of truth. But there's so many scriptures. Which scripture? It's the scripture of your own religion, obviously. So, yeah, scriptures can be like wildly mistaken. And so I do not consider scriptures to be a reliable source of truth. And then faith alone, most faith is essentially delusion. It's believing something that you don't have sufficient grounds to really know, so you just believe it. But, St. John of the Cross did have what he called dark faith. And dark faith, it comes from contemplation. It's like, according to St. John of the Cross, it's like you expel from your mind, you dismiss anything that is not God. And God cannot be understood intellectually, so the intellect goes. God cannot be sensed by the 5 or 6 senses. Sensory data goes. God cannot be known through the emotion, so the emotion goes. God cannot be known through any kind of mental state. And so all the mental states are dismissed, and you wind up with this emptiness, but still there's something there. And according to St. John of the Cross, that is, the presence of God. God is everywhere. The Spirit of God pervades the entire universe. So you can get rid of all of your mental states. And so long as you're still awake, you're still conscious, you're having a mystical experience, then you realize that even after you dismiss all the mental states, there's still something in your mind. And that is a kind of dark faith. It's not even really faith anymore. It's like this knowledge, but it's not intellectual knowledge. So, aside from like dark faith of St. John of the Cross, then faith also is no reliable criterion of truth. The Jehovah's Witnesses have faith in Jehovah's Witnessism, but that doesn't make it true, for example. So let's see, sola gratia, grace alone. Well, that one's kind of problematic, because if it was grace alone, and I mean, you can't do anything to become enlightened, for example, then you'd think it would just be like random. It'd be like winning the lottery. But even Christians who believe this don't believe that, because still you have to be, God has to find you more worthy than others in order to pick you out as going to heaven or being saved or whatever. So that one's kind of problematic. Solus Christus, Christ alone, of course, that doesn't hold any water at all to anyone who is not a Christian. Although there are some Buddhists who would have, solus Buddhas, Buddha alone. You have to believe in Gautama Buddha or you're not getting there. So yeah, I mean, that goes along with faith or scripture. I mean, that I don't see how that one is, I mean, to a non-Christian, I mean, that is, it's not different from at least one of the other ones. And then soli Deo Gloria, glory to God alone. Yeah, belief that all glory and honor belongs to God alone. Everything is ultimately for his glory. I don't even see how that is a criterion for salvation, unless it's just praising God is what gets you there. But yeah, in a way, like yearning for God or yearning for the absolute, yearning for the highest. I mean, that definitely has power. In fact, Paul Lowe, that I mentioned just a number of minutes ago, was saying that really that's really how you become enlightened, is you want enlightenment more than you want anything else. You're just burning for it, but you there's nothing you can really do to get it. And so you just want it with all your heart and all your strength, and then you just do nothing about it. And somehow that makes you ripe for it or something. So let's see. So the question here, after all this preamble and introductory material and all that, how would you rank these as far as knowability goes? Well, the only one that I consider to be of any value really would be faith, and that would only be like St. John of the Cross's dark faith, which is essentially a mystical experience where you're aware of the presence of the absolute or divinity or just pure formless consciousness or whatever you want to call it. So, I mean, it does leave out other things, like this is talking about criteria for salvation, I guess, whereas like in ancient Indian philosophical texts, they're wanting to know truth. And so like empiricism would definitely be on the list. I mean, short of mystical experiences, empiricism would probably be your best avenue to understanding something that can pass for truth anyway. But appeals to authority is not going to do it. Scripture is not going to do it. I mean, just faith, which is just sort of, wanting to believe. Yeah, that alone is not going to do it. Grace, kind of, but still there's got to be something else involved other than just grace, because it's really not a lottery. All sentient beings, it's not just they're being picked at random by somebody which ones are going to become enlightened or not. So yeah, I'd put mysticism at the top, empiricism below that, which isn't even one of the options in the rest of these. I mean, the divine grace one is just sort of in its own category off to the side, because I mean, it can be a factor in a sense. I mean, I as a Buddhist have a certain appreciation for the idea of divine grace, because there's nothing you can do to make yourself be enlightened, because anything that you do is karma, and karma does not lead to enlightenment. Karma just leads to the fruition of karma and more karma. And enlightenment is not the fruition of karma. So, golly, I don't even know if I answered this question. How would I rank those as far as knowability goes? And knowability, yeah, I think I'm confusing knowability with just the whole idea of what is an authentic source of genuine knowledge. If knowability is, I mean, how well can you know these then? Yeah, I guess I kind of answered that, sort of. So I think I'm just going to move on to Libra Lamb's next question. And this is kind of a weird one. Libra Lamb says, I work maintenance sometimes and had a situation where I had to remove 2 bird nests. One nest had 3 eggs and one had 5 birdlings. I had to get rid of them somehow and resolved to stomp on the one with the birdlings because I had been speaking recently about this topic and had previously resolved to do that exactly in this sort of situation. As I was going out to kill them, I showed them to a coworker and she asked what I was going to do, and I told her truthfully. She decided she wasn't having that and insisted that I put the nests in the woods so they die of exhaustion or natural processes. Considering I was prepared to do it but was spared by synchronicity, do you think it may have been minor bad karma not to kill them, since I chose to let her do it her way, knowing it would probably be worse for the birdlings and I could have been more assertive? So Libra Lamb here is asking if it's like immorality and not stomping on baby birds. Did he do something wrong by not stomping on baby birds? That's weird. So, I mean, yeah, you're going to have a certain amount of bad karma. No matter what you do, you're going to be making a certain amount of bad karma. Buddhist ethics are extremely fine-tuned, and it's virtually impossible to do anything that's pure good. Now, even just to believe that you exist while you're doing something, even if you're thinking, I'm doing this, that's delusional. And so, I mean, there's a certain amount of delusion motivating your behavior, or at least integrated with your behavior. And so you're going to be getting a certain amount of bad karma. So this is a no-win scenario. I mean, if you went ahead and stomped on the baby birds, I'm sure you'd get bad karma for that too. But just being stopped from stomping on baby birds, you have a certain regret that you didn't get to stomp on them, or you just, they're going to die more slowly and painfully. I'm not trying to badmouth Libra Lamb here. I mean, he was trying to do what was the most merciful, I think, just instantaneous squish instead of slowly, being, probably there's a good chance they would have got eaten by crows, like eaten alive by crows or something. Crows do raid other birds' nests and eat baby birds and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, there may have been minor bad karma not to stomp on them, but there probably would have been more bad karma to actually stomp on the baby birds. So, I mean, it's kind of a no-win scenario. I remember a long time ago, there was this German nun who was the board of directors of the monastery was trying to kick her out of the monastery, and it just wasn't working at all. Everything they did just failed. It's like Democrats trying to destroy Trump. It just keeps making him stronger and more popular. So anyways, they were taking all of the stuff out of her room and then locking the room from the outside and putting all of her stuff into the garage just to let her know you can't stay here anymore. You got to go. And she just moved out into a tent in the backyard. But I remember when they were doing that, there was a member of the board of directors was standing nearby, and she was saying, sometimes it's hard to know, what's the right thing to do. And I remember saying, sometimes there is no right thing. You just have to choose between 2 wrong ones. And that's kind of the situation of living in the world. That's one reason why monks renounce the world, because it reduces the odds of you being stuck in a predicament where you have to choose between, the lesser of 2 evils instead of just avoiding evil altogether. So, yeah, I suppose the correct Buddhist thing to do, aside from just refusing, risking your job over, refusing to tear down a bird nest with baby birds in it, would be just take them down. My sweetheart advised, and I think this would probably be what I would try to do too, if it were feasible, is you just take the nest and you put it somewhere else that's like within sight, so that when the parent birds come back to the nest, they don't find the nest. They can look around, they can hear the baby birds cheeping, and then they'll be able to find their babies and maybe continue to raise them, because baby birds grow pretty fast. It shouldn't take more than about 2 weeks before they're able to fly. So yeah, that would be my first option to even try to do it. But there's no telling what kind of environment it is. You don't know. I don't know whether that would have been feasible. But yeah, I don't think I could bring myself to stomp on baby birds. Yeah. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from Dan. And this question has been asked before, but I guess, if people keep asking essentially the same question, it's shame on them for not just carefully going through all 90 of my previous Q&A videos so that they can already know which questions have been addressed. But I mean, it does help. It's questions that a lot of people want to know the answer to. So I guess it's good to answer the same question more than once because people have crappy memories anyway. Like you can give a Dhamma talk and you'll be lucky if the hearers walk away with like 1 or 2 points from it. Some people just listen to Dhamma talks as a kind of entertainment, or they're hardly listening to the words at all. They're just kind of soaking in the good vibes or something. So anyway, Dan says, you mentioned Eckhart Tolle on your Q&As a few times. Do you think this Tolle is a legit enlightened person? I tried to listen to him once and quickly discovered that I've already heard all this. Nothing new here. Then I was curious as to how much he charges for his talks. $250,000 and more. I just tell people to try Alan Watts or Ram Dass out. Save your money. But what the fuck? I guess all long as the word gets out, if it helps, metta. Well, I have discussed this before. Like, what do you do about people like Eckhart Tolle who claim to be enlightened or are claimed by others to be fully enlightened? And, he's a layperson. I think he's married. He's got lots of money. Can he really be enlightened? And I've read his first book, In the Power of Now, and he does say a few things that I'd never heard before, like women identify mainly with their pain body. I'd never heard of a pain body before. Where he came up with this, I don't know. I mean, women kind of identify with their feelings more than men do. Men identify with their thoughts more than women do. If you will forgive the sexist stereotype I just uttered, but that does seem to be the case. And so, I mean, he had some kind of experience. He had some kind of awakening experience, whether he's fully enlightened or not, or whether he's just at a higher level of consciousness and misinterpreting that to think that he's fully enlightened. Maybe like I was discussing Daniel Ingram in the previous Q&A. And I mean, I don't think Eckhart Tolle is a deliberate fraud. Daniel Ingram, I can't say, but Eckhart Tolle, I mean, he had some kind of experience and it was like some kind of awakening experience, a mind expanding experience. And whether he's fully enlightened or not, I really cannot say. I mean, how can you say with regard to anybody? I mean, you can't know for sure that Gautama Buddha was fully enlightened. I mean, it's a very convenient working hypothesis for Buddhists, but you can't really prove it one way or the other. I mean, Gautama Buddha could be standing right in front of you and you still wouldn't be able to know for sure if he was an enlightened being. I mean, you might be convinced just out of faith or something, or awe or some such thing, but you can't really know for sure. Because, I mean, in this world, there really is no completely genuine criterion for truth. I mean, you can't really know the truth in samsara, so to speak. Maybe one could come up with exceptions or something. But 2 and 2 and 4. 2 and 2 equals 4. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Yeah, that's dubious. I mean, 2 what plus 2 what? And where's this multiplicity coming from? Maybe multiplicity isn't real. And then it's just a complete abstraction. If you just say 2 plus 2 equals 4, it's a total abstraction that does not apply to reality unless you apply it to something. And then it's 2 what plus 2 what equals 4 what. And then you got to know whether the 2 apples, for example, really exist. And that's problematic. But I'm just wandering way the hell away from Eckhart Tolle at this point. So, yeah, he did say a few things that I'd never heard before, like the pain body thing, or Eckhart Tolle in his first book also pointed out that, I mean, this probably isn't original to him, but you don't hear it very often, that almost all animals are already fully enlightened, except for a few like domesticated animals that have acquired neurotic. I almost tried to say neurosis and neurotic at the same time, and it came out neurotic. Like they've got some kind of neurosis from their human owners, and so they've become unenlightened. But yeah, that's certainly not a Buddhist teaching that all animals are already enlightened, although I can kind of understand what he's talking about, especially something like a copepod, some kind of plankton out in the ocean. They don't have any greed, hate, or delusion, probably. They don't have much consciousness either, for that matter. So, yeah, but getting back to Eckhart Tolle again, for like the fourth time at this point. Yeah, I mean, I really don't know if Tolle is a legit enlightened person. And like the very first question was referring to, I'm not sure that there is such a thing as a legit enlightened person in a samsaric context. Within the context of this world, at the very least, they're going to seem to still have greed, hate, and delusion. So, yeah, I mean, he's not bad to listen to. He's got a lot of YouTube videos that you can listen to for free. You don't have to pay through the nose to get a ticket to see him in person. Let's see. But yeah, I just don't know. I can't say for sure. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. And this is from Rybalder. And Rybalder says, what do you think came of the Gandharan Dharmaguptika school of early Buddhism? And the Dharmaguptika school was one of the 30 schools that arose after the time of the Buddha, but before Mahayana came along. And I don't remember whether it was on the Stavira side or the Mahasangika side of the first schism, but it was an ancient school of Buddhism. And what became of it, in all likelihood, is it was wiped out by Muslims, because Central Asia was all Buddhist. Most of India was Buddhist. And by the time Buddhism was going into China, I mean, there were some obscure, early schools that got into China. In fact, I've been told that technically there's still there are Sarvastivada monasteries in Japan, except it has just drifted so far away from the original Sarvastivada that it more closely resembles Mahayana than Sarvastivada. But around the old capital city of Nara in Japan, there are still a few nominally Sarvastivada monasteries, or so I have read. And so with regard to Dharmaguptika, Central Asia got converted to Islam, either willingly or by force. And then India, I mean, Buddhism pretty much just got genocided by Muslim Turks. And so, I mean, they weren't on an island like the Theravadins were. And so, I mean, the Muslims didn't have a navy at the time, or at least not one that was in a position to invade Sri Lanka. And so the Theravadins survived, whereas some of the other schools, like the Dharmaguptika, did not survive. Although now that I'm talking about this, I do think that there was a civilization in Burma called the Pew civilization, who were also Tibeto-Burmese, like the Burmese. They were there before the Burmese migrated into the plains of Upper Burma. And somehow I recall a theory that they may have been Dharmaguptika Buddhists, but it just died out. The Pew civilization was overpowered by the Burmese civilization, which was Theravadan at the time. And so they just got outcompeted in the places where they weren't just flat out exterminated by Islam or by Muslims. So yeah, it went extinct. Is essentially what happened to it. And it does cause some consideration of, why was it that Theravada survived? It wasn't just luck, good karma, I suppose. Anyways, I'm moving on to the next question here. This is from Robert. And Robert says, I am doing philosophy of mind at university. What is the Buddhist view of mind and body? Is it dualist or panpsychist? I'm trying to figure out what ontological view would allow rebirth besides dualism. Thanks from South Africa. Well, different schools of Buddhism are going to have different answers to the question of, the mind-body problem. Like most Mahayana Buddhists just reject physical matter. They're idealists. They're philosophical idealists at most or at best. So I guess I should back up a little. And I used to have a book on ancient Indian philosophy that was some kind of college textbook written by two Hindu Indian professors in India. It was designed specifically or mainly for Indian universities, just to acquaint them with, the philosophical landscape of ancient India. And so it goes over like different schools of Hinduism, and it goes over Buddhism, although the professors obviously were relying upon like old Pali text society books to understand Buddhism better. Talk about Jainism, talk about the Ajivakas, and also the Charvakas, who are like a materialist philosophers who are not particularly religious at all. In fact, I've read that the Kama Sutra of Vatsyayana is a Charvaka text. The first introductory chapter was essentially endorsing Charvaka philosophy or Charvaka ethics. But anyways, this book, it divided Buddhism, interestingly, up into 4 groups based on their metaphysics or their attitude towards mind and body. So you had one group, it was the Sarvastivada group, that considers mind and body to both be, or mind and matter to both be real, and you can know both of them directly. And this is pretty much the orthodox Theravadan point of view. The thing is that in like early medieval India, when they were having all these philosophical debates and the different schools were denominated and everything, that these professors who wrote the textbook were addressing, Theravada had already become pretty much of a non-entity in northern India. But it came closest to Sarvastivada. Sarvastivada, their position, according to this Indian philosophy text, was that mind and body both are real. Mind and matter, I should say, both are ultimately real, and you can know both of them directly. Then the next group was the Sautrantika school, I think, which was saying that mind and matter are ultimately real, and you can know mind directly, but you can know physical matter indirectly through like logical inference, logical deduction maybe. So you can know that matter exists, even though you can't know it directly, but just through intellect and so forth, that's good enough for you to, as proof that it really does exist. Then above that, you've got the Yogacara school of Mahayana Buddhism, saying that mind is real, matter is not real. You can know mind directly, you cannot know matter directly. And then finally, sort of the most extreme view is the Madhyamaka school, which is saying that you can't know mind or matter. Neither one of them is ultimately real. So take your pick with regard to the Buddhist view of mind and body. I guess I should emphasize the Theravadan view. And it's really hard to explain it exactly because the ancient texts, even Abhidhamma texts, as far as I know, really can't explain how mind and body interact very well. I mean, they don't even really, they don't have a concept of the human nervous system even. So, how do I answer this then? What is the Buddhist view of mind and body? Well, I mean, according to Theravada, Orthodox Theravada, mind, it's not just mind and body are ultimately real. You've got mind is ultimately real, mental states is ultimately real, and physical matter is ultimately real. So that would be 3 instead of 2. It's not just a mind-body problem. It's the mind-mental states body problem. So it wouldn't even be dualist. But in a way, Gautama Buddha was sort of like Immanuel Kant in modern Western philosophy, where Immanuel Kant was a kind of idealist in that, he accepted that there wasn't a thing in itself out there, but he denied that the human mind can grasp it or contact it in any way. It can only infer its existence through all these filters that are built into the human mind, categories, I think you call them. And so in a way, he admitted that there's physical matter out there, but he made it almost irrelevant. It's just redundant. It's like, so what if it even exists? Because you can't know it directly. You can't be sure of what it is. It doesn't really affect your mind in any way that you can know for sure. So what's the point? So a lot of Kant's successors like Hegel and Schopenhauer and so forth, they just did away with matter altogether. And a lot of Buddhists in Buddhist schools, they just did away with physical matter too, because it's largely irrelevant. Mind precedes all things. The first verse of the Dhammapada again. Mind is the forerunner. Mind is chief. It's all mind made. So, yeah, personally, I'm going along the lines of, I'm certainly not a dualist. So, panpsychist is Robert's, his second choice. I mean, he's got two options here, dualist or panpsychist. So I'd have to go with panpsychist, because I really do not think physical matter really exists. And even if you go with my theory of everything, the simile of the block of marble, it can be that physical matter is in that block of marble, but it can't differentiate itself because it is not mental. So, I mean, it might as well not exist. It doesn't even matter if physical matter really exists. It's just kind of a pointless argument, because as far as we're concerned, our reality is mental. I mean, we can be dreaming the physical matter, hallucinating it, or it could really be there, and it all amounts to the same thing, at least at the level of functioning in this world. So, we are recording, aren't we? Yeah, we are. Good. Yeah, I've still got like aftershocks of the old recording software that I was using that would say that it was recording, and then I'd have to do the same Q&A twice. I think one time 3 times. So, okay, getting back to Robert and his question. Yeah, I guess that would be it from my point of view. It's all mental. I mean, whether physical matter exists or not is largely irrelevant, because you don't have any direct knowledge of physical matter. I mean, the whole idea of the Sarvastivadins as portrayed by these two Hindu college professors who wrote the philosophy book, that mind and matter can be known for sure directly. I just do not see that at all, because mind cannot know matter, because mind can only know mind. Mind can only know mental states. So, I don't know if I've answered the question. Say, what ontological view would allow rebirth besides dualism? Yeah, and get rid of the dualism. I mean, physical matter. Yeah, there's no way to prove that it even exists. I mean, so many Westerners, they just accept scientific realism as the truth, and then try to fit any kind of spirituality. They just superimpose that. They try to fit it into the scientific realism. And yeah, it's not a very good idea, in my opinion. I mean, it's better than just ignoring spirituality altogether, but scientific realism is so deeply ingrained in the Western psyche at this point that people just do not see that it's just like an option, and probably not even the best option to adopt if you want to actually understand reality, not just phenomenal samsara. Scientific realism works fine for that, so long as you think that samsara is all there is, and there either is no ultimate reality, or is totally unknowable, or else the phenomenal universe is the ultimate reality. So, let's see. Did I answer this question correctly, or did I do it justice? I hope so, because I don't know what else to say on the subject. I'm not even going to try and get into, how the brain can generate consciousness, because I don't think it does. The brain, I've given the example of like a computer. It works kind of like a computer in that, a computer doesn't create electricity. It just takes that electricity and it complexifies it and organizes it and utilizes it. And that's kind of what the brain does with consciousness. The consciousness is already there, and the brain just complexifies it, organizes it, and utilizes it within the context of samsara. So, kind of, you can say that. So, I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from Mooners. And Mooners says, I struggle to do metta meditation because that requires me to send loving kindness to all living beings. My buddy has a girlfriend who has a roommate who has slept with over 70 different men in a year. This roommate was nearly assaulted one day by a group of men, and my buddy's girlfriends shared dorm together. Call me a bad person, but I just don't feel sorry for her. I struggle to send out metta towards people like that, or people with any sexual partners at all. I actually feel a deep sense of shame that we can both co-inhabit the same world system together. I am aware of my imperfections and know that this is not the correct mentality. How can I deal with this problem? Well, I don't really have any problem with sharing the cosmos with people that have sex. Everybody's parents had sex, for example. Most people do. It's really not that bad of a thing to do. It's not like the worst thing you can do is to have sex with somebody, especially if you love the person, But, people that work in torture chambers or something like that, arm breakers for loan sharks and so forth, terrorists, that kind of thing. I have more difficulty sending metta to them, or like certain politicians, just people that are like part of the establishment, the Brave New World Order establishment. Those people I dislike more, or have more difficulty feeling metta for them than I do for women that like sex, for example. So, in my case, I have a similar problem. I am not really a metta-oriented person. I'm more of a head-oriented person. I've never been the kind of person that just goes around, spontaneously gushing love in all directions. So I have been that way many times. But as a general rule, metta is one of my weakest paramis. And I've never really liked metta meditation because to some degree you're pretending. You're pretending that you love all beings, when if you had to face some of them, that so-called love would evaporate pretty quickly, I think. So I do think that a lot of metta meditation is really just people pretending. They got this warm, glowy feeling while they're just kind of thinking in the abstract of all beings. But really, if they had to confront some of these beings face to face, they would not be beaming love at them at all. So yeah, I just don't practice meditation. I've never really been good at it. Sometimes I just spontaneously gush love, especially towards animals, or just every once in a while you'll see somebody. There was this redneck customer that we had at work just a couple weeks ago. He's this little guy, just really racist redneck with a big pot belly. And just for some reason, he was walking towards his pickup truck, and I just blessed him. It's sort of like the ancient mariner blessing the sea snakes. It was, and then I just started blessing others too. I was like, yeah, I'm blessing him. Why not bless my sweetie too? So I started blessing her in my mind too. And just sometimes, like you see an elderly couple that they're just like walking hand in hand, like very much enjoying each other's company, like they still are in love with each other. Just that kind of thing makes me feel really happy. I want to beam love when I see something like that. But I've never really emphasized metta meditation, partly because to some degree it's like hypocrisy or self-deception or something. So, but anyways, going to the orthodox point of view, this sudden radical divergence over to the orthodox point of view, what you're supposed to do if you're practicing metta meditation is you're supposed to start with somebody neutral, not somebody who's really close to you that you love a lot already, not an enemy, but you start with just a neutral person and just practice beaming love at them. And then as you get better and better at just beaming love, then you can start getting into the more challenging people. So that's like a strategic way of dealing with it also. So I think I answered that. Oh, I might as well bring up the pebble method too. It was like there was a monk in Burma, Odamasara, who came up with this pebble method. Maybe he didn't invent it himself, but if you're trying to send metta to someone who really you got problems sending metta to, you just find this cute little round pebble and you name it the same name as the person that you're having trouble with that you want to send metta to, but you can't because they're just such an asshole or whatever. And then you just take that pebble and you put it into a little glass of clear water and you put that up on your altar. And then every day you take it down and you change the water and you rinse off the pebble and you rinse out the glass. And then you're thinking, just as this pebble is surrounded by cool, clear water, may such and such person also be surrounded by peace, and may they be happy. And one way of dealing with difficult people is just realizing that difficult people tend to be unhappy people. Like if you're happy, you tend to have a live and let live attitude. You're not going around fucking with people if you're a happy person. It's unhappy people that go around messing with other people and trying to get other people to be unhappy too. And so you can have a little bit of compassion, or really people that are just really difficult. Not only are they unhappy, but they're just stuck and don't know any better really. They're just delusional and just stuck in samsara. And so you can kind of have a certain compassion for that, which may take the edge off a little bit. And then ultimately nobody really exists anyway. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question here. And this is a difficult one because this person, Skoladin or Skuladin, has asked questions that I don't understand. And when I asked him to clarify, his clarifications also I did not completely understand. So anyways, his first question was, does probability have a saturation point? And I didn't know what that meant. What does probability having a saturation point mean? So then he tried to clarify it by saying, what are the limits between karma and probability? And then as a kind of explanation, he says, in the chapter titled The Stick That Heals from Miracle of Love, most of the testimony highlights the limits of either probability or karma, and sometimes both, like the smallpox case at the end. Yeah, I guess there was a long story at the end of that chapter about how Neem Karoli Baba helped to eradicate smallpox from India using psychic powers. And if you want to know the whole story, you probably should read the book, or at least read that story in the book. And the book is Miracle of Love, Stories About Neem Karoli Baba, edited by Ram Dass or compiled by Ram Dass. So what are the limits between karma and probability? And I guess he wants to know, like, where's the line between them? And I don't think there is a line between them. The limits between karma and probability. I mean, I guess, you've got some karma that is just so improbable that things are going to have to be set up just so for that karma to reach fruition. It may prevent, according to Orthodox Theravada even, you've got some kind of karma that the fruition of it is just so improbable, so you're so unlikely to encounter it just in the normal course of events that it'll eventually just fade out because it really never has a good opportunity to manifest as karmic fruition. So, I mean, there is some of that. I mean, your karma cannot reach fruition, through something that's impossible, just totally impossible, even barring miracles and so forth. So, yeah, this is a hard question to answer, partly because I don't fully understand the question. What are the limits between karma and probability? And if karma is conditioning our life, I mean, we're just creating our reality as the result of karma, just the psychic momentum of our mind. And I don't believe that physical matter is ultimately real. So that's it. It's just sort of our karmic stream. It's like Schopenhauer's will. So what are the limits between that and probability? I mean, probability would have to exist within that as its context, seems to me. I mean, what are the limits between Schopenhauer's will and probability? It's such a strange question. I've never really thought about it before. So I guess that plus a shrug of the shoulders is about as good of an answer as you're going to get from me, unless you can ask the question again in a clear, concise way that I can understand. So anyways, moving on to Skula Dean's next question. Are there any Buddhist letters or journals that describe the Opium War, not necessarily as the focus, but something like a slice of life with crackheads in the background? I don't think it'd be that rare, since that was described in various war journals in the Boxer Rebellion of 1901 and the novel The Good Earth. Well, the thing is, any Buddhist letters or journals describing the Opium War would almost necessarily have been like Western Chinese letters or journals, because that's where the Opium War took place, like back around the 1840s, I think. The British, in their imperialistic arrogance, were trying to force the Chinese to buy opium. And it was like, I think there was some, I don't know if he was the Chinese emperor or just some local magistrate or something, just raided the British warehouse where the opium was stored and destroyed all of it, because of course they didn't want their country to be a country of opium addicts, and that triggered a war. The British were demanding reparations on all their stuff that got destroyed and so forth. And I mean, it was just kind of a criminal kind of war perpetrated on the Chinese. And the British were so far advanced of the Chinese with regard to military technology and so forth. They just took a few ships and not very many British troops. They could just do what they wanted in China at that time. But it would be Chinese letters and journals. I generally have been a Theravada Buddhist. I'm much more interested in India than China. And I don't know what it would be. I'm sure there must be something still in existence of, at the time, some Buddhist monk talking about, something to do with the Opium Wars. I think there were 2 Opium Wars. But I have no idea. I have no idea what it would be, because I'm just not really into Chinese Buddhism, other than like the era, like the golden age of Chan, like Chinese Zen, with Joshu and Umon and those guys. When where most of the koans come from, the famous stories. I'm interested in that, but that was hundreds of years before the Opium Wars. So I guess I better just move on to the next question from Skoladin or Skuladin, which is another one that I didn't understand at first, but now I kind of understand it. His first attempt at the question was, what is the most underground evil creature in Burma? And I didn't really understand what is the most underground evil creature in Burma. So then he re-answered it, or re-asked it, like, what would be the most unexpected threat from the animal kingdom to people? And of course, there's the cliche that, human beings are the most dangerous animal. And in a military dictatorship like Burma, a visit from the secret police in the middle of the night, that could be an unexpected threat from the animal kingdom, because people are members of the animal kingdom. And every once in a while, I would be a little, I'd be imagining what would happen if the secret police just come knocking on my door someday, or knocking on my cave, whatever. So there is that. But I think probably the most dangerous animal in Burma, even more dangerous than secret police guys, would be the Anopheles mosquito. And that would be like an unexpected threat, because you might not even notice you're being bitten by an infected Anopheles mosquito, and a little while later you've got malaria. And malaria is not good. It kills a lot of people, especially the falciparum variety, which is the kind I always got. I'd be dead several times over if it wasn't for the miracles of modern medicine. So I'm not totally down on modern medicine, because some of it really is useful. But so there's that. Also, the Russell's viper is the deadliest snake in Burma. And that's another one that can catch you unawares. You're just reaching into a wood pile to pick up a piece of firewood, and you can disturb a Russell's viper and it can bite you. Or you have to walk outside at night to take a pee and you don't see it. They're camouflaged. They're, the color of like dead leaves, and they don't move around much. They're lying in wait as for a prey. And so, yeah, I've almost stepped on Russell's vipers before. Almost stepped on a banded crate once too, which I think might be more poisonous than the Russell's viper, but it's not as deadly or dangerous as the Russell's viper, because Russell's vipers are just mean. They're aggressive. Some snakes, they'll just avoid you if they can. They just mind their own business. If they see a human coming, they'll just go the other way. But a Russell's viper, they can stand their ground and start lunging at you. I mean, they're aggressive snakes. And if they bite you, you can easily die. So the most underground evil creature in Burma, I mean, you can take your pick amongst three of them. You've got the secret police guys, or just troops in general, soldiers. You've got the Anopheles mosquito, which probably kills more people than tigers do, obviously, especially nowadays. And then you've got Russell's vipers. But if you're out in the jungle, yeah, definitely the Anopheles mosquito is more dangerous than tigers. In fact, probably wild pigs would be more dangerous than tigers at this point, because there's not very many tigers left, and wild pigs they can be dangerous. I've been told that they'll start like butting and biting your legs, and once you fall down, you're done for. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. And this is a very tricky question even to read. So this is from Harim Kathul, or Hrim, H-R-Y-M, Harim Kathul. And he says, what are your thoughts on the relationship between karma and race? And I probably should just end there. But there is a little bit of description here. Let's see. I personally believe that the proliferation of inferior races, which is already pushing it on YouTube, and I'm not even going to say the part that comes after that, and the biological degeneration of mankind in general is a direct symptom of the Dark Age, like the Kali Yuga. There is no conception of bloodlines whatsoever. Marriage and children are something that essentially happens by accident in the modern world, with no deeper thought behind it. As such, and I really shouldn't even say the next word, such souls are attracted to this world. And then already in ancient India and Persia, the concept of blood and ethnicity gained great importance. Zoroastrian texts regard blood purity as holy and decry certain group of people as descendants of demons, written in the collection of myths Bundahishan. So let's just go up to the top here. What are your thoughts on the relationship between karma and race? Well, I do believe that different ethnicities have differences that are both physical and psychological on a statistical level, on average. And if you got a certain kind of karma that fits a certain ethnicity better, and also their culture better, then, you'll probably wind up there. But it's really not that big of a deal otherwise. The Buddha, for example, he didn't have much use for the caste system. He didn't spend a lot of time bashing it, but there was a caste system in India, and it was largely a racial, like apartheid almost kind of a deal, where you had the descendants of the invading Indo-Aryans, who were Indo-European people. They tended to be relatively tall, relatively fair-skinned, with a higher incidence of blue eyes and fair or brown hair. That they were like the top three castes in the caste system: the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and the Vaishyas. And then the Shudras were like the conquered subject people that were, of the like the Indus Valley civilization. The inhabitants of the Indus Valley civilization, especially at first, when the Indo-Aryans were coming through that part of India, which is now mostly Pakistan, I guess. So, there's always been, there's probably fewer so-called inferior races than fewer now, just because evolution keeps progressing. It's like, especially before you had modern times with ideas of like military equity, which is just bizarre. Nowadays, it's like some of the Western powers with regard to the whole Israel-Gaza thing. It's like they want equity. They want it to be equal. So if Israel is kicking butt too hard on the Gazans, they want to give the Gazans time to rest and re-equip and everything, so that it'll be more of a fair fight or something. But in nature, it just doesn't work that way. And so you wind up with certain races, conquering other races, or just driving the other races, into the mountains or something, back in ancient times. So I don't know exactly what caused me to start talking about that. He says here, marriage and children are something that essentially happens by accident in the modern world with no deeper thought behind it. Yeah, as a general rule, people don't care much about your lineage or ancestry nearly as much as they used to. And it used to be that people were much more xenophobic. And you can get some feel into why it was that way by watching like The Walking Dead, the old show about the zombie apocalypse. And the people were more dangerous than the zombies. You can't trust anybody. If they're an outsider, you fight to the death to protect your own tribe, but you see another human being, they can be an enemy. You don't know who they are. Even if they act friendly, they could just be pretending to be friendly in order to get the knife in your back, at a convenient opportunity. And that's the way life was for a long time. And that's one reason why people were so ethnocentric in much earlier times, like pre-modern times, well up into modern times. Because, it was such a tribal mentality that, you pretty much had to be a member of your own tribe and see everyone else as just potentially dangerous outsiders, potential enemies. So I do think there should be marriage and children, to some degree, it's like a meritocracy. You pick one of the best people that's willing to have you. That's, everybody does that, it seems like. At least there's enough of that going on that it is like a major factor. Choosing a mate, you're trying to choose the best one that's willing to settle for you. And so, yeah, race is largely irrelevant. And to the Buddha also, race was largely irrelevant. It was just, the Buddha had more of a Martin Luther King Jr. kind of attitude, is, you should judge a person based on their own personal qualities and not on the color of their skin or anything else. So, but getting up to the main question here, what are my thoughts on the relationship between karma and race? Yeah, your karma is going to land you where you need to be, what part of the world and what kind of body you need to have. So, that's the relationship right there. I don't think that like the mixing of races or miscegenation is really necessarily a problem. Although, to have propagandists promoting it for ulterior motives is not good. But if people just naturally of their own volition, you just fall in love with a member of a different ethnicity. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. It used to be a big deal even for, like an English person to fall in love with an Irish person or an Italian person or something. I mean, even that was a scandal, in earlier days. But I don't think that it's really a major issue from like an ethical or even really a civilizational point of view. Although, I mean, the deliberate effort to just flood Western countries with non-Western people in order to essentially demolish the civilization. Yeah, that's not good. But that's a whole different, I mean, it's the motives that really are essential in Buddhism. Love is a positive motive, and desire to overthrow Western civilization is not a good motive. So I guess I answered this question. And that's pushing it for YouTube. Seriously. I mean, if I had read the entire question, yeah, there's no way this video would stay on YouTube for very long. Man. Although I do my conscientious part, and also just the self-serving part of trying to have everything, censored enough or like avoiding taboo language enough that this can be viewed by numerous people, whoever wants to view it, I guess. So anyways, I'm just going to move on to Harim Cathul's next question, which is as follows. I have recently been reading some essays by Julius Evola, and his ruminations on the nature of magic in the modern world deeply resonated with what I already thought. Do you think that magic is fading out of the world during the Kali Yuga, so to speak? Certainly, if we take ancient tales at their face value, it seems that the supernatural was much more potent in the ancient past. I believe the reality we live in is literally becoming solidified. It is no wonder then that man has focused his attention on matter and technology. He is no longer able to sense and use subtle energies. Well, certainly a belief in magic and the supernatural was much greater in earlier times than now. And I think that like awareness of magic and the supernatural is much reduced now over what it was before. But I mean, it's still there. It's still going on. It's just happening at a subliminal level. It's happening with, like liminal people on the fringes, that sort of thing. But this reminds me more of, what's his name, Rene Guénon, than it does Julius Evola. I haven't read very much by Julius Evola, other than, his famous book on Buddhism and a few essays and so forth. Oh, also one other book about pagan imperialism or something like that. But Rene Guénon, yeah, he talks about this a lot, how we are, it's like supposedly his magnum opus. It's one of his most famous books, The Reign of Quantity and the Signs of the Times, where his theory is that people are becoming more quantitative and less qualitative in their thinking. They're caring more about measurements and values and so forth, and it's helping them to become more materialistic, and they're just blinding themselves to the supernatural. And it's like their belief, their lack of faith is sort of kind of limiting their awareness. It's sort of blocking out the supernatural, and it's still out there. And sooner or later, as civilization starts to collapse, this crystalline shell around us that is, in a way, it's made up of just belief in materialism, and it's sort of holding out sort of supernatural elements, supernatural forces, that it's going to start cracking and breaking. And then supernatural forces are going to start flooding in to the human psyche. And according to Rene Guénon, the cracks are going to start lower down first. So it's going to be the dark forces are going to be entering first. But I mean, this sort of thing, I mean, you read the New Testament of the Bible. It's like Jesus goes back to his hometown of Nazareth, and the people there, they're like, hey, isn't that Jesus the carpenter? I mean, don't his brothers and sisters live here in town with us? I mean, who does he think he is? And so their lack of faith prevented him from being able to perform many miracles, and the dogs are acting up again. Stop it, you guys. Yeah, it doesn't mean you come over and start pestering me. These guys are silly. Yeah, you know what I said. So, I mean, even in ancient times, I mean, if you just positively disbelieve something, it makes it less likely to happen because, you know, its mind is the forerunner and all that. So, yeah, I do think that there is definitely a reduction of the magical in modern Western civilization. It still exists around the edges. It has to exist around the edges. Otherwise, we'd just be locked into just dead material, like dead determinism. So let's see. What is the question here? Maybe I should find out exactly what the question is here. Do you think that magic is fading out of the world during the Kali Yuga, so to speak? Yeah, it's fading. It's never going to completely fade out, but it's fading, and it's sort of inhabiting more liminal, sort of on the edge kind of places in our society. It's certainly not mainstream anymore. I mean, to some degree, it's kind of mainstream, like all those ghost shows. You know, you got these people that go out looking for ghosts and they never find anything. You know, about the best evidence they come up with, they've got like this recorder that's got lots of static on it. And it's like, you know, they're like listening to the static, and the static goes like, and they're going, it says go away, I'm going to kill you. And then it's like the other one says, oh yeah, that's what it said too. And then, you know, that's like their evidence, aside from the people that are seeing the shadow figures. I mean, shadow figures are a dime a dozen. I mean, you can't even watch a ghost show without people mentioning shadow figures or getting scratches on their skin. They always take pictures of it too. It's like, I woke up one morning, I had these scratches on my arm. It's like, do you have a picture? Yeah, I've got it right here. See? They just carry it around with them all the time. So, yeah, I mean, the supernatural or the paranormal, the magical, it's never going to completely die out. It can't completely die out. But, I mean, it's our disbelief in it. You know, the disbelief of the people I've been talking about before who just consider science to explain reality. You know, they've just been programmed since childhood to believe that scientific materialism is gospel truth. You know, it's just obvious gospel truth. I mean, it's just self-evidently reality. That's the attitude that a lot of people have, including a lot of Western Buddhists, probably most of them. So, yeah, so I guess I answered the question. I guess. Let's see. He's focuses his attention on matter and technology. He is no longer able to sense and use subtle energies. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much the situation of modern man. We are like spiritually deaf and dumb in a certain way. You know, we're just blind to a lot of reality just because it doesn't fit into our worldview. And so our beliefs, especially the deeper down beliefs, help to determine what it is we're able to experience. You know, it's mind-made anyway. So it's not that magic is really disappearing. It's like belief in magic is disappearing, and just the magical qualities of life in general are, you know, it's like science does its best to explain everything. Anomalies are ignored. It's just standard procedure in science that you ignore anomalies as much as you possibly can because it just messes up the data. You know, like in chemistry, it's just standard procedure. If you're taking 20 measurements and one of those measurements is way different from the rest, you just throw that one out because you would just assume you did something wrong. So it just kind of filters out anomalies so that everything is just regular and following strict rules and everything. And yeah, it's not really sustainable. Sooner or later, it is going to crack, and we are going to swing back in the opposite direction and live in a more magical, supernatural kind of a world. Unless just AI takes over and finds us inconvenient and does away with us or something. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rui. And I do have a feeling that I'm not like really nailing some of these questions. sometimes it's really hard to answer some of these questions because they tend to be of rather not necessarily vague, but it's like a, I don't know, kind of a, what's the word on numinous? I'm trying to say numinous. It's just of a nature that it's like really clear, concise answers are not much of an option sometimes. So anyways, the next question is from Rui. And Rui says, hello, Panyo. Apologies if you already answered questions on this topic before, but what is your take on or experience of nimitta? And that's a good question from a Buddhist point of view, even. It's just a good question in general, but specifically from a Buddhist point of view, or a Theravada Buddhist point of view, that there is this phenomenon called the nimitta. And nimitta literally means sign in Pali. It can mean like just like a boundary marker is called a nimitta. It's just like a sign that is the boundary. That's the where the boundary is right there. But in meditation, the nimitta, according to Orthodox Theravada, is this image that you see in your meditation, and usually it's like a white circle or oval, or sometimes you can even see like the Buddha sitting there, or something more elaborate. But usually it's like a white or a light gray or maybe a goldish kind of circle or oval that you'll see in your field of vision with your eyes closed while you're meditating. And that is a symptom of what is called, access concentration. And it's like the precursor to first jhana. According to the commentarial tradition, when you start seeing the nimitta, that means you've got access concentration or neighborhood concentration. And that means you're right at the verge of first jhana. It's almost like, it's like pre-jhana. And there's two problems with this. One problem is that it's not mentioned at all in the suttas, that this is pure commentary. So it's not really canonical. And the second is that what is canonical in the suttas is the Buddha saying that when you practice meditation, you should cultivate the signless or the animitta. So you're trying to get rid of nimittas when you meditate, not trying to cultivate a certain kind of nimitta to get you to a certain stage and then get rid of it. It's just, cultivate the signless, the animitta. So you've got the suttas saying, you shouldn't be, concentrating on nimittas. And then you've got the commentarial tradition saying, yeah, you need the nimitta before you can get jhana. And so considering that you'd think that if it was really important, the Buddha would have addressed it in his suttas. Why is it, if it's so important, if it's like mandatory that you experience this before you get jhana, why is there no mention of it in the suttas? Why would that get relegated to the commentarial tradition? And I think it's largely an artifact. I have experienced a nimitta at least once. It was sort of like a light gray goose egg kind of in my field of vision when my eyes were closed and I was meditating. My meditation was going relatively well at the time too. But I didn't attribute any specific significance to it, partly because that would be just another nimitta. That's more of the nimitta that the sutras are talking about. When it says cultivate the signless, it's not saying cultivate, a mental state that doesn't have the glowing egg in front of you. It means like any kind of symbol is a nimitta, any kind of thinking, any kind of, interpretation of anything would be nimittas. It would just be symbols in your mind. And so when you're cultivating the signless, you're cultivating a mind that's free of symbols, free of perception, essentially, because perception is always symbolic. So if people experience it, that's fine, but you shouldn't make a big deal of it, because it's really just like an artifact of the commentarial tradition. Is presumably based on a common phenomenon in meditation. When you start getting into deeper meditation, you're likely to see some kind of bright spot or something. But I do not consider it to be of any great importance. So I guess that's my take on the nimitta. And so I'm going to move on to the next question. This is from Cleefy. And Cleefy says, it feels that some evil force took over the West and the rest of the world. how to deal with this without letting the hatred or anger towards those who don't see it to overwhelm oneself. Yeah, well, this is kind of reminds me of the question that I already answered about the person who can't send metta to people who have sex. But here's and yet this is like an example that I was giving of, I mean, I don't have any real problem with sending metta to people who aren't virgins or aren't celibate. But yeah, it's like the politicians and the multi-billionaires, the donor class and so forth, who are steering Western civilization towards suicide or towards this weird mutated version of Western civilization of just sort of a mongrel sheep populace that are ruled over by the intelligentsia, who essentially are controlling the beliefs and opinions of the mongrel sheep. Those people are, I mean, they consider themselves to be, I mean, they're very self-righteous. You know, they consider themselves to be the good guys. At least a lot of them do. Like, there was, I met this monk in Burma, and he was sort of a social butterfly of a monk. And he went on this trip with one of the top executives of Google. And he was an Indian man. And this Indian man had like a biorhythm kind of a watch that would point out to him when his body is becoming uncalm and so forth. You know, he was really into like meditation and so forth, like Jerry Dorsey or also the founder of Apple, Steve Jobs. You know, they were like into meditation and cultivating altered states of consciousness. You know, they probably dropped acid numerous times, and you know, they're trying to be good in that sense, trying to be spiritual in that sense. But then, you know, partly because of all their money and their influence, they just get this God complex and just assume that what they think is a good idea, what people tell them is a good idea, and they go along with it, must be necessarily a good idea. And, you know, they're able to twist things around so that, you know, what turns out to be more bad than good is really, it's just self-evidently good to them. But I think I might be straying from the question here. It feels that some evil forces took over the West and the rest of the world. How to deal with this without letting the hatred or anger towards those who don't see it to overwhelm oneself? Well, I mean, it is good to bear in mind that, I mean, you put yourself here. You are creating your own reality. You are creating a reality that contains these presumably evil forces taking over the West and the rest of the world. I mean, your karma is working itself out. It's not like you're a helpless victim who is stuck here against your will, that you have to endure this. As you put yourself here because you need to learn how to deal with this kind of stuff. So, I mean, if you realize that hatred or anger is poisoning yourself, then you're much less likely to indulge in it, regardless of the reason. So let's see here. Yeah, I mean, that's one way of looking at it. That if you are angry or hateful, you are poisoning yourself. You're making bad karma, regardless of your reasons for it. Although I guess some reasons might be more justifiable than others. So, and there are some people that think that really there is like malevolent forces, not just bad humans or misguided elites who just think they're God or something, but really just sort of dark forces are moving in. I think a lot of Christians would believe that too. And again, I mean, we put ourselves here. We are the ones who are responsible for the world that we are living in because we are generating it. And if we weren't supposed to be in a world like this, we wouldn't be in a world like this. We'd be in some other world. So that's one way that I look at it. That, I mean, I've mentioned a number of times that I feel like a pagan in like late 4th century, early 5th century Rome, when paganism is just being wiped out by the hysterical intolerance of the new Christians, and like Goths are running amok, and it's just like everything's going to shit, and it's like the government is just like the patricians, the senatorial class, are just fighting to keep everything bad because they're making lots of money through it being that way. And it's just like reading the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, especially once the fall starts, like after the Battle of Adrianople. Then I mean, it's just tragic. It's sad. It's reading a tragedy, and we're kind of getting into the. We're in the decline phase, definitely. I don't know if we've hit free fall yet, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I mean, it can be heartrending sometimes just to observe what we were and what we're coming to. But I mean, we put ourselves here. We're here for a reason, and we need to learn how to deal with it wisely. So, yeah, I mean, the best way not to let hatred or anger overwhelm you is, first of all, be mindful. And so that you don't just get taken over by hatred or anger. You can see it coming, and then even when it comes, then you can observe it as a phenomenon that is arising instead of just, I'm pissed off, I hate these people. It's just, hate is arising, anger is arising, that kind of a thing. And just realize that hatred and anger are just, you're poisoning yourself when you indulge in these things. So, I mean, once you really fully realize that, then, I mean, it becomes way less of a problem. So I hope I answered that question, because I'm moving on to the next one now. And this is from Faust Ian, which I think might be a person named Ian who just adds Faust to the beginning of his name. Faust Ian. And Faust Ian says, do you conceive of hell realms as other dimensions, or simply extremely painful rebirths on Earth? Among the invertebrates, there's infinities of unspoken agony to be suffered. There is no need to imagine realms beyond that. Heavens in the real world on Earth may be incarnations of one's ball of karma in the form of, say, an eagle or an oak tree. I predict your answer is in line with your mangled crab story, though you do not attribute much pain and probably pleasure perception to most things in the natural world. Yeah, well, getting to the top part here, and I just wiggled the camera with my elbow, is, do you conceive of hell realms as other dimensions, or simply extremely painful rebirths on Earth? This is almost another case of like scientific materialism, in that, well, now I'm distracting myself, because should I open the Red Bull or finish this cold coffee? Yeah, I do not consider this to be anywhere near to being the only world. There are an infinite number of worlds. This is not the only one. So there are hell realms on Earth. I mean, I've seen a few that, I mean, just like crack houses and stuff. I mean, they can be really awful places, or like a Thai whorehouse where girls are actually sent by their parents to these places. They just don't want to have a daughter to deal with. They just they sell them to a whorehouse in Bangkok, where they're just like slaves. And I assume they're not particularly happy people. And so, I mean, there are painful rebirths on Earth, and also relatively pleasant rebirths on Earth. It's like somebody born on the coast of California, where they're out doing yoga on the beach and hasn't been overrun by homeless people yet. So, but still, I mean, there are definitely there's more than one realm of existence. I mean, an infinite number. Just an infinite number. And so most of the hell realms are not on this earth. And like he's talking about infinities among the invertebrates, there's infinities of unspoken agony to be suffered, and invertebrates may not experience agony. It's like there's so much just icky stuff going on in nature. You got the parasitic wasp that lays eggs in a caterpillar or just onto its back, the really primitive ones that haven't learned how to make nests or anything yet. They'll just fly up to a caterpillar and either insert their ovipositor and lay an egg inside the caterpillar, just carefully missing any vital organs. Or they just lay an egg on top of it, and then the larva of this wasp will like burrow through the caterpillar, and they somehow reflexively know what organs to avoid in order not to kill the caterpillar, in order to keep the meat fresh. Stuff like that is just going on all over the place. Like most of the animals in this world, at least on land, are parasites, because almost every animal's got at least one parasite. I mean, we got parasites. I won't go into gory detail, but even like follicle mites and so forth. So, but then, I mean, they got such a tiny mind, they can't really experience much suffering. So, my father has hypnotized people, and they've wound up going into hell realms, like in like astral travel. And it's like there's this spirit guide who took this woman who was in a hypnotic trance into this like a prison, and there's all these people like behind bars just screaming they want out of the cell. And then the spirit guide just took his hand and waved it through the bars, and then he took her hand and waved her hand through the bars to point out that those bars were created by the minds of these people that were behind bars. So I'm just kind of rambling all over the place, as you may have noticed. But invertebrates, I really don't think that invertebrates really feel suffering. Or if they do, it's a very tiny amount. Even an octopus, which I have read is approximately as intelligent as a cat, apparently it doesn't feel physical pain. If it's nervous, it'll just be like nibbling off the ends of its own tentacles. And, like praying mantis, I mean, a lot of you probably know how mantises have sex. It's like the female, while she's being mounted by the male, will just turn her head and just bite off the head of the male. And that doesn't kill him. It doesn't even slow him down. It causes him to go faster. That's just built into the system. It works that way. So, yeah, I mean, among the invertebrates, I wouldn't say there's infinities of unspoken agony to be suffered, because partly their whole nervous system is different from ours. They don't have a central nervous system, really. They apparently do not feel pain the way we do, or even have like any kind of like mental images. It's all sort of like reflexive and immediate. And most of them, setting aside cephalopod mollusks and a few others maybe, they just have this tiny speck of consciousness, like an oyster or something. I mean, they're almost a plant, they're so dumb. So, yeah, heavens and hells, for the most part, are not on this earth, although we've got sort of little earthly imitations of them in certain parts of this world. So, I guess I answered that question. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Joe Doe. And Joe Doe says, can you please recommend the best Buddhist teachers, in your opinion, to listen to? And it's a good question, although I'm not the best person to ask, because I generally do not listen to Buddhist teachers. I mean, I've just never been interested in watching Buddhist videos on YouTube. I started watching one the other day, and it was so tedious. I've heard it all before. And this person really was not like the best expert on the subject anyway. That, I mean, I made like 2 or 3 attempts and then just gave up. So, I mean, I would guess offhand, like Ajahn Punadamo, he'd be good to listen to. Ajahn Sona, there's the famous Nyanamoli, the new famous Nyanamoli was in Slovenia, I think. The jacked one, the really muscly one. Gosh, I mean, Ajahn Chah, if you've got, I don't think there's going to be any, I mean, he'd be speaking Thai anyway, but sometimes you'll have Ajahn Chah monks who are just reading about Ajahn Chah, monks in the Ajahn Chah tradition reading about Ajahn Chah. Some of that's really nice. Ajahn Chah really was a very insightful, intuitive kind of a monk. Very wise being, in my opinion. There's also an Ajahn in Thailand, I think he's German, Piyadamo, that he seems to give fairly good Dhamma talks. But Yeah, I'm really not the best person to ask because I don't watch these videos as a general rule. So maybe in the comments, if anyone is watching, has gotten this far, and they know of good Buddhist teachers like who are on YouTube or have podcasts or something that they could advise Joe Doe what to listen to. Because as I say, I generally just do not um, watch Dhamma videos or listen to Dhamma talks much. I mean, the last Dhamma teacher that I was really listening to a lot was Paul Lowe, and he's not really a Buddhist teacher. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here, which is from Kzen or Kazen. And he says, are you familiar with Dipa Ma? I have read some very interesting stories about her CDs, etc. And CDs is like psychic powers. And yeah, I've heard about Dipa Ma. I've read like maybe 2 articles about Dipa Ma, but I don't know that much about her. That she was very much in style, like in fashion, like back in the 1990s, partly just because she was female. But she's also very wise, apparently. I would assume some people at least consider her to have been enlightened. I assume she's not alive anymore. But yeah, I mean, I really don't know that much about her. Partly because, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, I don't really watch a lot of Dharma-oriented videos or read a lot of Dharma-oriented material. You know, it's sort of like a jazz musician I used to know in Bali who didn't like listening to other people's music because he didn't want to contaminate his own individual style. I'm kind of like that with regard to Dhamma. Plus, at this point, I've pretty much heard it all. You know, it's all just review at this point. So, I guess I'll just move on to the next question. There's one question about Dipa Ma, though, that I remember reading. I think it was in Inquiring Mind magazine. There was this German monk in southern Burma who had sent me a bunch of Inquiring Mind magazines. And there was one article about Dipa Ma, I remember. And someone was reminiscing about how they went to a cash machine and got some money out of the cash machine. And Dipa Ma was lamenting over the poor person who was living inside that wall with no windows or anything, having to put the money through the slot. She didn't understand modern technology. I think she was Bengali, like from Bangladesh or something. But she was Theravada, like a nun. She wasn't a bhikkhuni because that hadn't become a thing yet at that time. So anyways, I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from the proto-pseudo-monk, also known as Cool Whip, I'm pretty sure. And the proto-pseudo-monk says, is it the body or the mind that gets tired? Well, it's definitely the mind that feels tired, because just mindless matter doesn't feel anything. So it would definitely be the mind that feels tired. Although if we assume for the sake of argument that physical matter does exist, then we can assume that there's a kind of physical fatigue, you know, just getting worn out, you know, that, you know, energy levels get lower, that kind of a thing. So then in that sense, the body could get tired, but it certainly wouldn't feel tired. It wouldn't feel sleepy because that's what the mind is doing. So I'm just going to move on to the proto-pseudo-monk's next question, which is, how is memory explained in the view of mind alone? The first verse of the Dhammapada. Matter may arise from mind, which is idealism, but doesn't memory or brain prove that matter is ultimately real, as suggested by Abhidhamma? Also, we lose memories when we switch brains at rebirth. Okay, well, there's a few things I can mention here. First of all, with regard to Abhidhamma, Abhidhamma certainly does not imply that the brain is the source of mind, because according to Abhidhamma, mind arises in the Hadaya Watu, or the heart base. And so according to Abhidhamma, or the Abhidhamma commentaries, that consciousness or thought, mind, arises in a little bit of blood or fluid in one of the chambers of the heart. And the brain, they don't even know what the purpose of that is. So I think we can set Abhidhamma aside for at this point. And let's see. Gosh, it's like 2 questions here. Maybe I need to make a gap here, which then increases the proto-pseudo-monk's number of questions to 4, which is somewhat transgressive. And I think it's even more transgressive because what happened was he asked like 2 questions. And then it turned out that while asking these 2 questions, it reminded him of something else. And so he said, well, I'll just ask that next. And then he just kind of re-asks the first 2 and then asks another one. But then his re-asking of the first 2 actually created at least one more question, so that we're up to like 4 or 5 here. And so proto-pseudo-monk, I mean, don't feel regret, because regret is always an unskillful mental state. But I think by not deleting your first 2 questions and then adding, sort of superseding those with 3 questions, we've wound up with like 4 or 5 questions here. And the first one I already answered, whether the mind or the body gets tired. Let's see, how is memory explained in the view of mind alone? Let's see. Okay, so this is kind of interesting because I was thinking about this a lot. In fact, I was considering writing a blog post, sort of reviving my blog, just for the sake of one blog post in which I'm discussing memory. And from the Buddhist point of view, I mean, memory doesn't really, there's not really a clear explanation of exactly how it works. As far as I know, there was one commentator under a Q&A that was pointing out that there were suttas that explain memory, but I don't remember exactly how the suttas explain memory. But it seems to me that memory is very closely related to karma, that it's a kind of karma, because karma itself is habit energy. It's like stored momentum of like behavioral momentum and also thinking momentum. And that's essentially what memory is especially with regard to the mental aspect of it. So, and also it would help to explain why it is that if a person has a past life regression and they remember events in a previous life, that it was really the most emotionally intense events in that life that they're most likely to remember. That memory and karma they're interwoven. That memory itself is a kind of karma, kind of habit energy, habitual momentum of your psychic stream, so to speak. So, yeah, I mean, that's like just recently, I just started thinking that that'd probably be a good way of looking at memory from a Buddhist point of view as like a karmic phenomenon. It's psychic momentum, that like some event leaves an imprint on your mind, and then the momentum just prolongs that imprint. And that would be a kind of memory, especially certain forms of it, certain modes that it can assume. So I guess I answered that one. So no need for the blog post, I guess. And then he says, okay, matter may arise from mind, which is idealism, but doesn't memory prove that matter is ultimately real? No, it really doesn't, because, I mean, the only way you even know of the existence of the brain is through your mind. You don't directly experience brain, you only directly experience consciousness. And then there's like symbols that you interpret as brain that come up in your field of perception. So, yeah, we lose memories when we switch brains at rebirth, but still it is possible, in some cases at least, to remember things from a previous incarnation, a previous existence. But I mean, in this version of reality, the way science especially has explained things, and that in a way it kind of collapses the state vector, so to speak, and it kind of locks us into that interpretation of reality, is that, I mean, it's pretty clear that certain areas of your brain get damaged. It definitely impairs your cognitive abilities. It's like the right temporal lobe. If that gets damaged, then you lose the ability to speak. Or I think it's the parietal lobe. If that gets the right, I'm getting confused here. I think it's the left temporal lobe. that's like where Broca's area is or something. Then you lose the ability to speech, and like the right parietal lobe is, if that gets damaged, you can become tone deaf, and like your appreciation for music disappears. Like in the back, what's it called? I don't remember, but it's in the back. If that gets damaged, you can go blind and so forth. So obviously, in this version of reality that we've got going for ourselves, that the brain does certainly condition mentality. Although, you go to a different version of reality, then there's no telling what the situation is going to be there. So, let's see. Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, memory does not prove that matter is ultimately real. I would just make that statement, that clear, concise statement right there. Because, I mean, you can't even prove that the brain really exists. You cannot prove that physical matter exists. I double dog dare you to prove that physical matter ultimately exists. Like the philosopher George Berkeley, he opened the can of worms to begin with, at least in modern Western philosophy, by just doing away with the whole idea of physical matter. And he called it immaterialism. And a lot of philosophers have tried to prove him wrong, but I don't think anyone succeeded. I don't think that Berkeley was completely correct in his philosophy, that all that exists are minds and perceptions, and that there's this one central mind that coordinates all the perceptions, and that one central mind is God. And so when you see an apple on the table, you're not really seeing an apple on the table. What's happening, according to Berkeley, is God is implanting into your mind a perception of an apple on a table. And that as you move through navigate your way through the kitchen and all that, and you reach and you pick up the apple and all that, God is simply implanting these dream images of you eating that apple, but there really is no apple. And I mean, nobody, as far as I know, has been able to disprove Berkeley. I don't know how they would possibly disprove Berkeley. I don't think that Berkeley was right, but I have to admit, I can't prove that he was wrong. So there's no proof that physical matter even exists, regardless of the fact that most Western people in the world today just accept it as obviously true. That is irrelevant. So I guess I'll just move on to the proto-pseudo-monk's next part of the question here. So he says, Venerable Punyobasa, the law you follow, positives and negatives shall balance out, and used frequently is akin to the Tao. To me, this also sounds like like a variation or interpretation on the second noble truth. The Taoists also go down the route of is, abdicating any ought to, with regard to the is-ought problem that started the previous Q&A. But there might be a danger in conflating the Tao with the second noble truth, because the Tao will carry on, is incessant with no beginning and no end. It is already perfect. It isn't trying to escape itself and achieve enlightenment. It already is enlightenment. It is where samsara and nirvana are the same, fractals flowing, going on and on and on, ... The infinite formless block of stone. So following this principle may be like staying in samsara. The second noble truth is one to understand, to escape samsara, not become one with it. How do you interpret following the Tao versus the goal of enlightenment, escaping samsara? Okay. Well, I mean, you don't really reject samsara. If you become enlightened, you can't really have aversion for samsara. You can't really get rid of it. It's just that you accept it with complete unattachment. In a way, you transcend it. You go beyond it. So, in that way, you'd be like at one with the Tao. But first of all, well, this wouldn't be first because I've already been talking. But this whole thing about the second noble truth and well, let's see, where does he say this? Okay. The law that you follow, well, I mean, it's more of a working hypothesis. Positives and negatives shall balance out, and used frequently is akin to the Tao. To me, this also sounds like a variation or interpretation of the second noble truth. I don't really see any clear connection of the three things. One is the Tao, one is like yin and yang, positive and negative, balancing out in the long run. And the third is the second noble truth. The second noble truth says that desire or clinging is the cause of all suffering. So, I mean, how is that related to the Tao, other than that desire and clinging in a way you're sort of going against the Tao. You're going against just the universal harmony sort of a thing. So that part I don't really see that very well. How like universal balancing of positive and negative has really anything to do with the second noble truth, unless it's just like the second noble truth is if you're going violation of the universal harmony. You know, I mean, you're kind of setting yourself at odds with the way things are. You want things to be different from the way things are. Now, that could be positive or negative, I guess. But yeah, I really don't see any persuasive connection between the second noble truth and just like the balance of positive and negative. But in his first version of this, the first version of his question, it was, your cosmic principle, positives and negatives shall balance out, has been proved in my experience, particularly every Sunday after each video. The huge positive of the greatest show with no name is followed by a huge negative filled with the absence of the show with no name. Can this principle be thought of as a variation on the second noble truth? And the whole idea of everything balancing out, it really is not specifically emphasized in the Pali text. It's more of a Taoist thing that I've picked up. It's not really emphasized in the Pali Suttas. I think the closest they've got in Orthodox Theravada that comes close to that would be the concept of Lokadhamma. And Lokadhamma could be more or less accurately translated as the way of the world or the ways of the world. And I just happen to have Jnanatiloka's Buddhist dictionary right here. And if you look up Lokadhamma, it's this little thing right there, says worldly conditions. And then he's got a quote. 8 things are called worldly conditions since they arise in connection with worldly life, namely gain and loss, honor and dishonor, happiness and misery, praise and blame. So those are the 8 ways of the world, and it's 4 pairs of opposites. And the implication is that those 4 pairs of opposites, I mean, you're going to have to encounter them regardless of how you live your life. And so in a way, it's kind of a balancing of positive and negative. And that, I mean, everybody is going to be experiencing gain and loss. And everybody is going to be experiencing honor and dishonor, happiness and unhappiness, praise and blame. So that's about as close as Orthodox Theravada gets to the idea that positives and negatives have to balance out, at least according to my understanding. And the dogs are acting up again. Just a second. Stop it, you guys. And when I say stop it, you guys, it doesn't mean run over here and start scratching my arm. Silly. Come on. No playing. So, let's see, where was I? Oh yeah, Lokadhammas. And so it's really not a Buddhist concept, even though I think it is a really elegant theory. And then he continues here. This was like his first version of the second question or something. It says, though the Arahant is an anomaly and breaks the equation, I wonder if there is a name for this cosmic law. For example, 1, law of equipoise, 2, principle of balanced dualities, 3, edict of equivalence. And what I call that theory or working hypothesis is the principle of subjective equilibrium. That subjectively, positive and negative have to balance out. Objectively, maybe also, but definitely subjectively, that it may be that one person seems happier than another person in this world. You look around, there's one person who's always frowning and complaining, another person who's always smiling and never says a bad word against anybody. But I mean, those kind of balance out too in your objective experience. But subjectively, each one of those people, I mean, that's just their status quo. That's just neutral for them. They identify that as neutral. And so the person who's like frowning and complaining, they get a certain amount of satisfaction, maybe even a certain amount of pleasure from complaining. Whereas the person who's just smiling all the time, I mean, they've got their own, just hidden issues that is just not showing because they've just gotten into the habit of smiling all the time. So, yeah, what I call it is the principle of subjective equilibrium. And that is the end of the Proto-Pseudo-Monk's questions here. And so I'm moving on to Pope Kevin I. And his first question is, are there any examples in the suttas of people remembering their past lives as animals? And if you read the Jataka stories, the Buddha himself remembers lots of past lives as animals. And he remembers that, Ananda was this animal and Sariputta was that animal back when they were all animals together. And some of the Jataka stories are also found in like the suttas and the Vinaya. Like there's the story of the wise quail. And he had two friends, the elephant and a monkey. And they were trying to decide who was the oldest one so they could pay respect to the elder. And so, let's see how it went. I think it was the monkey. No, the elephant. Anyways, I think the monkey could remember that. You see that fruit tree over there? I remember when I was young, I could just sit on the ground and reach the top branches of it. I think the elephant went first, and he remembered when it was, he could reach the top branches of it with his trunk or something. Then you got the monkey, who's much smaller. He remembers one of his earliest memories is he's able to sit on the ground next to it and reach the top branches. But then the quail remembered that he ate a piece of fruit at some other place and pooped at that point where the tree is now. And that's where the tree grew, was out of the poop from the quail. And so they decided that the quail was the oldest. And so they paid respect to the quail. The elephant and the monkey both paid respect to the wise quail. And then the Buddha was saying that, in the previous life, according to the Jataka version, I can't remember if he says this in the Vinaya, I assume he does, but he was the quail in a previous life. And then I think Ananda was the monkey, or Sariputta was the monkey, and Ananda was the elephant. Or, in Jataka stories, the Buddha is always the wise central figure, even if it's an animal like a fish or a frog or a monkey or a fox or whatever it is. And then the other features, he's the wise rabbit, the wise hare. And then, it's like the other animals in the story, they're all talking and so forth, acting like humans. They're also, this monk and that monk. And so, yeah, in the suttas, the Buddha himself is remembering his past lives as animals. But for the most part, you don't have a lot of cases in the suttas of other people remembering past lives, because most people just can't remember past lives as animals. Or if they do, they just don't talk about it much because it's mainly emphasizing what the Buddha said and not what other people were saying anyhow. But yeah, there's definitely, the Buddha himself definitely in the Orthodox Theravada remembered many, many times when he was an animal. So I'll just go on to Pope Kevin I's second question here, which is, what do you think the common phrase in the Pali Canon means, quote, liberated through not clinging, unquote? And it seems to me that's pretty self-evident. Liberated through not clinging. If clinging and attachment are the cause of all suffering, and the third noble truth says that, through the cessation of clinging and attachment, then you got the cessation of suffering. And if the cessation of suffering is liberation, then, you're liberated through not clinging. You're liberated through not insisting upon things being a certain way, which may be a helpful way of looking at clinging, is just insisting or strongly preferring that things be a certain way. And as a general rule, sooner or later, things aren't going to be that certain way that you insist upon or that you strongly prefer, which then causes unhappiness. But an enlightened being does not insist upon things being a certain way or strongly prefer things be a certain way. And so he's just, he's let go. He's at one with the Tao. So yeah, it just seems self-explanatory to me. That it seems pretty obvious. Liberated through not clinging means that you're liberated because you're not clinging anymore. Or maybe he could give me the Pali version or the context, the sutta or something, and maybe there'd be some more complications I could discuss, thereby expanding my answer out to several minutes. But as it is, I think I answered that question, so I'm going to move on to Indian Guy, who I think also goes by the alias of Trevor. An Indian Guy says, I have a question about the time you had a glimpse into Nibbana while you had a stomach ache and were skilled in mindfulness, so your mind cracked. What do you think made you become once again what made the experience temporary? So that's the main question here. So I'm going to make a space. Did you delight in it? Laugh my ass off. LMAO. So I guess that was just him trying to answer his own question. So then he says, I had an experience that only lasted up until I tried to make sense of it again and grasp it. So I guess I wasn't skillful or ready enough. I think of that story quite often and I don't know why. Maybe you could make my Sunday by explaining it again so I may complicate it. LOL. And when I first came across LOL, after I stopped being a monk and started dealing with acronyms on text and the internet and so forth, I had no idea what LOL meant. I thought it meant maybe lots of luck. I was pretty sure it didn't mean little old lady. Anyways, let's get back up to the top here. And I'm clearing my throat. It's a habit I inherited from my mother. She used to clear her throat a lot, especially when she was nervous. So anyways, I'm going to clear my throat again. And let's see. The time that I had a glimpse into Nibbana, at least that's how Indian Guy interprets it, while you had a stomach ache and were skilled in mindfulness, so your mind cracked. What do you think made you become once again that made the experience temporary? So essentially the question is, if I had this insight, this deep, like some kind of experience, what caused me to just go back to the way I was before? And that would just be the momentum of karma. I had a relatively profound insight, I suppose, but still karma is habit energy. It's just the momentum. And so it didn't just all stop when I had that experience. You've got who knows how long of reinforcement, just reinforcing this momentum of mental energy, mental momentum. And so there's that, it's just the force of karma, just regaining the upper hand, so to speak. And also, as just whatever has a beginning has an end. Nothing lasts forever. And so you have like a profound meditative experience or some kind of insight. It's not going to last forever. It's eventually going to fade out, sort of like, some enlightening experience on LSD or some such, ayahuasca or mushrooms or something. It goes away too. It has a beginning and an end, a beginning, a middle, and an end. So, yeah, it was mainly just an event that occurred that had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and then just the stream of the momentum of my karma was still moving in the accustomed, habitual direction, and so it just took over again. And then he says, did you delight in it? LMAO. To some degree I did. I was so happy that I was almost crying at the time, even though I was doubled over in pain at the same time, which is what he's asking for here. See, maybe you could make my Sunday by explaining it again so I may contemplate it. LOL. Well, first of all, it's kind of a long story with regard to how it all came about. But I got sick, and then it just deprived me of all consolation in life, just being a monk and everything. couldn't sleep, couldn't eat hardly, just couldn't even take a bath and feel good that way because I had a fever and the doctors were saying you should just sponge yourself down, don't take full showers or anything. Couldn't meditate, and I just kind of hit rock bottom. And it caused me a kind of depression where I was just thinking, what's the point? It just seemed all futile. And then I pretty much gave up. It's just like, I just can't do this. This isn't working. And so I just kind of let go. And that letting go was apparently what I needed at the time, because then I just started going into these spontaneous mindfulness states, also some of the best meditation of my life, just really getting into these states where you're just sitting there in a state of just clarity and silence, just wide awake and not thinking anything. Your mind is just clear like glass. And it was at that time, one day, I was walking down these stone steps to the lower monastery where the well was, because I was going to take a shower because I wasn't sick anymore. But anyways, I'm going down these stone stairs and I start getting really intense abdominal cramps. Like I had eaten some shrimp curry earlier that day that had gone off or something. And so I'm doubled over in pain. Anyone who saw my face would think that I was dying. And I'm sort of contemplating the likelihood that I'm going to be making at least 3 emergency trips to the outhouse that night. And then it starts raining. And I wasn't prepared for the rain. I didn't have an umbrella. And I only had 3 robes at the time, including just one lower robe, one upper robe, one outer robe. So then I'm thinking, well, I'm going to be making 3 emergency trips to the outhouse tonight at least. Plus, I'm going to be wearing wet robes tomorrow when I go for alms round, because I'm getting rained on. And I was just down about to the level of the steps where my outhouse was. I remember that much. And it was like there was this sudden shift in consciousness, because I was being very mindful at that time, just spontaneously. Just, you feel the wind on your skin, you feel your clothing brushing against your skin, you're mindful of blinking and swallowing your slobber and so forth. Just very mindful at the time. And then this shift occurs where all of a sudden, all this pain and commotion, getting rained on and the stomach cramps and everything is just like waves up at the surface. And I was deep down in like cool, still water. And I could look up if I wanted to and see all the commotion going on up there, but I just wasn't identified with that anymore. That was not the center of my consciousness, so to speak. It was like the center of my awareness was deep down in this cool stillness, where I could look up and see the commotion going on up there, but it really wasn't me. It was almost kind of irrelevant. It was just waves going on at the surface up there. So I have had people tell me, like this one really new agey guy once, I mentioned this in a talk in Bellingham, Washington. And afterwards, this really new agey guy, he was a really nice guy. He came up to me and said, what you described is an enlightenment experience. And I mean, I wouldn't consider him to be an authority on enlightenment experiences necessarily. But, and then Indian guy also refers to this as a glimpse into Nibbana, which I don't know for sure that it is, although it was definitely like the thinning of the veil, so to speak. A kind of mystical experience in which you're no longer really identified with the phenomenal surface self, that there's like a deeper level that you identify with more. And I guess if it was really Nibbana, you wouldn't be identified with anything. I mean, there would be no center of awareness necessarily. So, yeah, that was one experience. I had a number of experiences during that time. But I guess I explained it. But I mean, even though I was doubled over in pain, and when I was having that experience, I was so just overjoyed and thankful that, I was almost just weeping tears of joy, even though I was doubled over in pain, getting rained on. And anyone who saw my face would think that I was in pain and definitely not happy. But I mean, you can be in pain and be happy at the same time. So there's something else I was going to mention, but it looks like I've forgotten what it was going to be. So, but yeah, experiences like that definitely can be very insightful. In which, I mean, just for starters, the very idea that you can be in pain and happy at the same time, or you can be like in relatively severe pain and just not identified with that at all. It becomes almost irrelevant. And I mean, it's not even to the level of you're being an actor playing the role of somebody who's in pain. I mean, it's just like, it's just not in the center of your awareness at all. It's just kind of on the fringe. So I guess I explained it. So I'm just going to move on to Indian guy's next question. And which is as follows. Sometimes I watch the awesome Ajahn Punadamo and I wonder if he would stop fidgeting his thumbs and moving back and forth, he might obtain the final wisdom or gain insight, because maybe even fidgeting and moving is kind of a mechanism of the mind's way of coping with boredom, and it's a way of pleasing the senses and clinging. I'm not so sure that it's a way of coping with boredom or pleasing the senses and clinging, but you do have a certain amount of mental energy that is just sort of, in many people, most people, I assume, just manifesting itself unmindfully. Like when I was a kid, I used to fidget a lot, like just kicking your chair leg just mindlessly, that kind of thing. And sometime around the age of 18 or 19, after I started reading like Buddhist books and so forth, I just trained myself not to do that kind of mindless fidgeting so much. I still do it a little bit. Like when I'm talking, I wave my arms around a bit, which is really unnecessary, I guess. And there is like the nervous habit of clearing my throat sometimes, although there is definitely kind of a feeling of phlegm or something in my throat that triggers it. My mother did that a lot when I was a kid, I remember. But now oh yeah. So there are times when, like, I used to know a person who was a fan of Adyashanti. And Adyashanti is another one of these people who either claims to be fully enlightened or is claimed by their followers to be fully enlightened. And so I watched a video of him talking to somebody, and he did have like nervous mannerisms, and he would say stuff like, there was this one thing that he kept saying. It was something like, where, I mean, he'd plug it in like 2 or 3 times into a single sentence. And it seemed like it was unmindful behavior where he's not fully aware that he's doing it. Although once you get enlightened, then it's like what your body's doing is largely irrelevant. You're not identified with it anymore. And so it's just going to be like residual karma that's just sort of pushing your body forwards through time. So, but still, I mean, that is a kind of an indication, like if they're fidgeting or using certain like filler words just that don't have any meaning over and over again, that could be an indication that they are not fully enlightened. Like when I watched Daniel Ingram on a video a little over a week ago, he was kind of like that too. He just seemed kind of nervous and fidgety to some degree. And that kind of caused me to think maybe it was just sort of further evidence that he wasn't really what he claimed to be. Then again, Neem Karoli Baba up there, who just was Superman, spiritual Superman as far as I'm concerned, he did a lot of arm waving and like rocking back and forth, and just, it's like people who would shave his head would be complaining all the time. He'd get his head shaved by somebody and he'd be like talking the whole time and moving his head and going like this and just trying to like get the dot on his forehead after. I mean, they could hardly get him to stay still long enough to get the dot centered between his eyes. Like the ash or whatever it is that a Vaishnavite Hindu has there. So it's hard to say, because like I was saying towards the beginning, even a fully enlightened being is to some degree going to have at least the outward appearance of having greed, hate, and delusion. So it may be that Adyashanti acting nervous really was irrelevant. Or Ajahn Punadamo, who is fidgeting his thumbs and moving back and forth, it may be irrelevant, or it may be that it's just an indication that he's not fully mindful and doing certain things without full awareness. And it's hard to say exactly in many cases, because you can't read the other person's mind. Especially on a video, it might be really tricky to read the mind of a person who's just a digital representation on a screen. So that wasn't even really a question, but it is something that has occurred to me many times, that just fidgeting is kind of an unenlightened behavior. But then again, once you're enlightened, you can still have apparently unenlightened behavior, which really complicates things. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from the chosen one. And not a chosen one, mind you, but the chosen one. And the chosen one says, what is a higher rebirth? The rebirth at the highest rank of God destined to be extinguished at the end of its life, or a human Buddha destined to be enlightened in the middle of his own life? Well, it seems to me that the higher rebirth would be kind of a value judgment, and it would just depend on the feelings of the person who was saying it. I don't think there's like an objective, like empirical way of categorically stating that one of these births would be higher than the other one. But just assuming that a human Buddha destined to be enlightened in the middle of his own life, I mean, he's going to get enlightened and he's going to attain Nibbana much sooner than the highest rank of God destined to be extinguished at the end of its life, because the gods way up in the highest heavens, they can live for like billions or even trillions of years. So it may be that even a normie is going to eventually get enlightened quicker than one of those gods up there who's not going to become enlightened for billions or trillions of years. So in that sense, I would assume that the human Buddha destined to be enlightened after only, say, 29 years would be considered higher or better or preferable to being like in a very exalted heaven realm where you're guaranteed enlightenment at the end of your existence there, but the end of your existence there may not be for billions of trillions of years. So I guess I'll just pick B. So then I move on to the next question, which is from Mara Maid Mahayana. See, man, this is turning into a long one. I didn't think this was going to be very long. I must be digressing more than usual. So anyways, Mara Maid Mahayana says, I was given a book by Ajahn Metiko Bhikkhu, which was also written by him, about the blessings of recitation in the teaching of the Awakened One. It also covered the Thai recitation styles of Pali, Samyoga style, Magadha style of King Mongkut, Amaravati style of Ajahn Sumedho, etc. Since Pali is an Indo-European language and Thai is a tonal language, the Thai script was only invented 700 years ago, errors have crept in. For example, most communities chant the worship formula Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa as if it were written Namo Tassa and then Sama Sambuddhassa. Yeah, that makes sense. How did you chant? As original as possible, or was there also a Burmese style? Well, yeah, definitely a Burmese style. Like in Burmese, with a Burmese accent, you'd say Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa, because S is pronounced like TH, and a U before a double consonant is pronounced like O, and so on. So, yeah, I think that since Pali was never a vernacular language, that it was sort of an artificial language, or that's what the scholars are saying nowadays, that everyone is going to be speaking it with an accent, that you're not going to have just pure Pali, because everyone's going to be speaking Pali with the accent of their own native language. And so a Burmese person will be speaking Pali with a Burmese accent. A Thai person will be speaking Pali with a Thai accent. I'll be speaking Pali with an American accent, maybe an American accent superimposed on a Burmese accent. And so, yeah, I don't think there is a really pure way of pronouncing Pali. And the scholars nowadays are saying that the Buddha probably didn't even speak Pali anyway. So trying to get to the original pure Pali is probably impossible and unnecessary anyway. So it's good that it's unnecessary, considering that it's impossible, because if something is impossible, don't do it. I mean, you got to draw the line somewhere. And one dog is crying because my sweetheart is going somewhere. So, let's see. So there was more than one Burmese style, in fact. There's the Muns in southern Burma had their own pronunciation scheme. The Burmese had their own pronunciation scheme. Also, my teacher was from the city of Pukoku, and Pukoku had its own pronunciation scheme that was even weirder than regular Pali. So, yeah, I don't think even a Sri Lankan Theravada Buddhist would speak pure Pali the way the ancient Pali speakers spoke it. So, I mean, each country's pronunciation is going to have some good points and its bad points. I think the Burmese may get the O correctly, where like the vowel O is actually an umlaut, is pronounced O. Sort of like that's why in Sanskrit it's AU. Like Gautama is pronounced like in Sanskrit, like English in transliterated in English it'd be Gautama, whereas in Pali it's Gotama. But the Burmese pronounce the O as though it's pretty much like an AU, which may be more correct than the way others are pronouncing it like a hard O. But yeah, there's no way to really know for sure. Let's see, how did I chant? Yeah, I just chanted with a Burmese accent because I was in Burma most of the time and staying at Burmese monasteries most of the rest of the time. And then when I try to do a video or something, I'll try to translate it into like Western correct, like international pronunciation of Pali. But a lot of the time I just confuse myself because I naturally, through habit, want to pronounce it the Burmese way. And so I'm like, in my mind, I'm trying to translate that over into international pronunciation. And sometimes I get myself confused. So, yeah, I mean, there were certain things that I just refused, like pronouncing R like Y, which is what the Burmese do. Yeah, I just couldn't do that. R is pronounced like R. The reason why the Burmese pronounce R like Y is that the original Burmese language did not have an R sound. So now they've got two letters. One is called Yagaut, which means crooked Ya, which is really the R sound in Pali. So most Burmese monks will pronounce it like R because they know enough to know that it's really is supposed to be pronounced like R. But in the Burmese language, that same R is just pronounced like Y. So they have a Y and an R, but like in Pali, you've got like a Y sound and an R sound. But the Burmese, as a general rule, just pronounce both of them like Y because there was no R sound in the original Burmese language before they adopted the Pali alphabet, which contains R and Y, or rather RA and YA. So I guess I answered that question, and this is turning into a longer one than I was expecting. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which it turns out all of a sudden is the last question, which it always catches me by surprise because the little bar on the side, the little sidebar thing showing you where you are in the document it's not even halfway down. I don't know why it does that. So anyways, Maximin, who was a barbarian emperor of Rome, if I'm not mistaken, asks the following question. Would I breach any copyright laws by sampling some of Tanisaro's Parita chants on a track I'm recording? Well, I'm not sure if you would breach any copyright laws. I kind of doubt it because I don't think Ajahn Tanisaro necessarily copyrights anything. That pretty much everything he does is for free distribution, which is good. Although if you wanted to do this in as straight and above board manner as possible, I mean, you could just contact him and ask his permission. And if it's not some sort of, rap about abusing women or something that you just want some chanting in the background, then I don't think that he would necessarily be opposed to you sampling some of his chants. But I mean, if it's relatively wholesome material that you are recording, then yeah, I don't think there'd be any problem with it. But I'm not sure. I don't think it would be illegal for you to do that, especially if it's modified slightly. I do seem to recall that the band Enigma or the person Enigma I don't even know who Enigma was. I missed out on Enigma. I didn't even hear about their existence until I came back to America in 2011. But they did get into some trouble from they did a song Return to Innocence where they were sampling some, I think it was Taiwanese, some kind of Taiwanese shaman who was chanting, and then the Taiwanese shaman actually sued them. So I mean, you can modify the sound of it so that it, it's changed enough that it's not the same sound or the same material necessarily. But yeah, I mean, if you wanted to make sure, you could just ask his permission. I assume he would give permission so long as it's not something that's like really outrageous, something really immoral. So I guess that's it. I think I answered all the questions. So you know the drill. If you got any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below this video, or if you have access to my Subscribe Star channel, you can ask them there. Although people most inclined to ask questions who do the Subscribe Star thing, just get onto the Discord server and ask them there, because there is a specific room for asking questions for Q's and A's on the Discord server. And anything that you think I can answer, anything that you think I might be knowledgeable in, like philosophy, Buddhist philosophy in particular, Buddhist monasticism, Burma, monasticism in general, that kind of thing, then feel free to ask. And hit like if you haven't already, especially if you liked it. I mean, don't hit like if you didn't like it, I guess. And subscribe if you haven't already, and be happy.